well, I guess 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah, whatever. It's too late. So, man, I just... Actually, yeah, I don't need this. Is this in the mode? Yeah. I really don't like what they give us when they give us this windowed mode. Yeah, I've had a weird couple of days. It's like almost, maybe I came down with something on. But my mind is not working. Well, it is. But I'm just not zippity-doo-dah as it were. But it's there, you know. Well, you know, I have like, yeah, something's going on, a little bit of a headache. Haven't been drinking any booze. So, I have noticed my Macarena audio is completely gone. Won't come back. I sort of like it. I mean, think about it. If you were like actually a robot pilot or whatever, you're at some console, you know, somewhere. Not, I mean, you know, talking about real robot, well, you know, like the drone ones we have now, you know. Guys are not blaring sound or whatever. It's like a total quiet office, you know, watching a computer monitor job. That's heavy, man. That's scary. I wish this survey thing would go away. I've already filled it out. But there we go. Now, the thing that I'm going to try that's going to be different is going to be this. Alright. I think this is it, folks. It's coming. Okay.
There was, and making this demand in order to stifle the prosecution demanded that the management of it should be entrusted to him. Partly on the ground that he was a Sicilian, partly because he was, as he stated, a personal enemy of Verres. Also he alleged that having been his questor in Sicily, he knew better than Cicero could know the crimes which Verres really had committed. Cicero replies to this with many reasons why the conduct of the prosecution should be committed to him, especially because he did not volunteer to take it up, but is urged by a sense of duty, being begged to do so by all the Sicilians. And also because he is in ever respect well able to conduct it, from his acquaintance with the Count and with the Sicilians. There is some question why the speech is called divinatio, and different reasons have been alleged for it. Some saying that it is because it refers to what is to be done, not to what has been done. Others, that it is so called because no witnesses and no documents are produced, and the judges, having to decide on the arguments of the speakers alone, are forced to guess their way. Cicero carried his point, and the prosecution was entrusted to him. One if any one of you, O judges, or of these who are present here, marvels perhaps at me, that I, who have for so many years been occupied in public causes and trials in such a manner that I have defended many men but have prosecuted no one, could now on the sudden change my usual purpose, and descend to act as accuser. If he becomes acquainted with the cause and reason of my present intention, will both approve of what I am doing, and will think, I am sure, that no one ought to be preferred to me as manager of this cause. Superscript 2. As I had been questor in Sicily, O judges, and had departed from that province so as to leave among all the Sicilians a pleasing and lasting recollection of my questorship and of my name, it happened, that while they thought their chief protection lay in many of their ancient patrons, they thought there was also some support for their fortunes secured in me, who, being now plundered and harassed, have all frequently come to me by the public authority, entreating me to undertake the cause and the defense of all their fortunes. They say that I repeatedly promised and repeatedly assured them, that, if any time should arrive when they wanted anything of me, I would not be wanting to their service. Superscript 3. They said that the time had come for me to defend not only the advantages they enjoyed, but even the life and safety of the whole province, that they had now not even any gods in their cities to whom they could flee, because Caius Verres had carried off their most sacred images from the very holiest temples. That whatever luxury could accomplish in the way of vice, cruelty in the way of punishment, avarice in the way of plunder, or arrogance in the way of insult, had all been borne by them for the last 3 years, while this one man was traitor. That they begged and entreated that I would not reject them as suppliants, who, while I was in safety, ought to be suppliants to no one. 2. For I was vexed and distressed, O judges, at being brought into such a strait, as to be forced either to let those men's hopes deceive them who had entreated succor and assistance of me, or else, when I had from my very earliest youth devoted myself entirely to defending men, to be now, under the compulsion of the occasion and of my duty, transferred to the part of an accuser. I told them that they had an advocate in Quintus Sicilius, who had been questor in the same province after I was questor there. But the very thing which I thought would have been an assistance to me in getting rid of this difficulty was above all things a hindrance to me. For they would have much more easily excused me if they had not known him, or if he had never been among them as quaestor. 5. I was induced, O judges, by the considerations of duty, good faith, and pity, by the example of many good men, by the ancient customs and habits of our ancestors, to think that I ought to take upon myself this burden of labor and duty, not for any purpose of my own, but in the time of need to my friends. In which business, however, this fact consoles me, O judges, that this pleading of mine which seems to be an accusation is not to be considered an accusation, but rather a defense. For I am defending many men, many cities, the whole province of Sicily. So that, if one person is to be accused by me, I still almost appear to remain firm in my original purpose, and not entirely to have given up defending and assisting men. 6. But if I had this cause so deserving, so illustrious, and so important, if either the Sicilians had not demanded this of me, or I had not had such an intimate connection with the Sicilians, and if I were to profess that what I am doing for the sake of the Republic, in order that a man endowed with unprecedented covetousness, audacity, and wickedness, post thefts and crimes we have known to be most enormous and most infamous, not in Sicily alone, but in Achaia, in Asia, in Cilicia, in Pamphylia, and even at Rome, before the eyes of all men, hold be brought to trial by my instrumentality, still, who would there be who could find fault with my act or my intention? 3. What is there, in the name of gods and men, by which I can at the present moment confer a greater benefit on the Republic? What is there which either ought to be more pleasing to the Roman people, or which can be more desirable in the eves of the allies and the foreign nations, or more adapted to secure the safety and fortunes of all men? The province is depopulated, harassed, and utterly overturned. The allies and tributaries of the Roman people, afflicted and miserable, are seeking now not for any hope of safety, but for comfort in their destruction. 8. They who wish the administration of justice still to remain in the hands of the senatorial body, complain that they cannot procure proper accusers. Those who are able to act as accusers, complain of the want of impartiality in the decisions. In the meantime the Roman people, although it suffers under many disadvantages and difficulties, yet desires nothing in the Republic so much as the restoration of the ancient authority and importance to the courts of law. It is from a regret at the state of our courts of law that the restoration of the power of the tribunes is so eagerly demanded again. It is in consequence of the uncertainty of the courts of law that another class too is demanded to determine lawsuits. Owing to the crimes and infamy of the judges, even the office of censor, which formerly was used to be accounted too severe by the people, is now again demanded, and has become popular and praiseworthy. 9 is a time of such licentiousness on the part of the wicked, of daily complaint on the part of the Roman people, of dishonor in the courts of law, of unpopularity of the whole Senate, as I thought that this was the only remedy for these numerous evils, for men who were both capable and upright to undertake the cause of the Republic and the laws. I confess that I, for the sake of promoting the universal safety, devoted myself to upholding that part of the Republic which was in the greatest danger. 10 Now that I have shown the motives by which I was influenced to undertake the cause, I must necessarily speak of our contention, that, in appointing an accuser, you may have some certain line of conduct to follow. I understand the matter thus, O judges, can any man who is accused of extortion, if there be a contest between any parties as to who may best be entrusted with the prosecution, these 2 points ought to be regarded most especially. First, whom they, to whom the injury is said to have been done, wish most to be their counsel. And secondly, whom he, who is accused of having done those injuries, would least wish to be so. For 11 this cause, O judges, although I think both these points plain, yet I will dilate upon each, and first on that which ought to have the greatest influence with you, that is to say, on the inclination of those to whom the injuries have been done, of those for whose sake this trial for extortion has been instituted. Caius Verus is said for 3 years to have depopulated the province of Sicily, to have desolated the cities of the Sicilians, to have made the houses empty, to have plundered the temples. The whole nation of the Sicilians is present, and complains of this. They fly for protection to my good faith, which they approved and long known. They entreat assistance for themselves from you and from the laws of the Roman people through my instrumentality. They desire me to be their defender in these their calamities. They desire me to be the avenger of their injuries, the advocate of their rights, and the pleader of their whole cause. 12 Will you, O Quintus Sicilius, say this, that I have not approached the cause at the request of the Sicilians? Or that the desire of those most excellent and most faithful allies ought not to be of great influence with these judges? If you dare to say that which Caius Verus, whose enemy you are pretending to be, wishes especially to be believed, that the Sicilians did not make this request to me, you will in the first place be supporting the cause of your enemy, against whom it is considered that no vague presumption, but that an actual decision has been come to, and the fact that has become notorious, that all the Sicilians have begged for me as their advocate against his injuries. 13 If you, his enemy, deny that this is the case, which he himself to whom the fact is most injurious does not dare to deny, take care lest you seem to carry on your enmity in too friendly a manner. In the second place, there are witnesses, the most illustrious men of our state, all of whom it is not necessary that I should name, those who are present I will appeal to. While, if I were speaking falsely, they are the men whom I should least wish to be witnesses of my impudence. He, who is one of the assessors on this bid, Caius Marcellus, knows it.
I should have been jumping on
whom I see here present, Pausulentius Marcellinus, knows it. On whose good faith and protection the Sicilians principally depend, because the whole of the province is inalienably connected with the name of the Marcelli. 14 These men know that this request was not only made to me, but that it was made so frequently and with such earnestness, that I have no alternative except either to undertake the cause, or to repudiate the duty of friendship. But why do I cite these men as witnesses, as if the matter were doubtful or unknown? Most noble men are present here from the whole province, who being present, beg and entreat you, O judges, not to let your judgment differ from their judgment in selecting an advocate for their cause. Deputations from every city in the whole of Sicily, except 2, 3, are present. And if deputations from those 2 were present also, 2 of the very most serious of the crimes would be lessened in which these cities are implicated with Caius Verus. 15 But why have they entreated this protection from me above all men? If it were doubtful whether they had entreated it from me or not, I could tell why they had entreated it. But now, when it is so evident that you can see it with your eyes, I know not why it should be any injury to me to have it imputed to me that I was selected above all men. 16 But I do not arrogate any such thing to myself, and I not only do not say it, but I do not wish even to leave anyone to believe that I have been preferred to every possible advocate. That is not the fact, but a consideration of the opportunities of each individual and of his health, and of his aptitude for conducting this cause, has been taken into account. My desire and sentiments on this matter have always been these, that I would rather that any one of those who are fit for it should undertake it than I. But I had rather that I should undertake it myself than that no one should. 517 The next thing is, since it is evident that the Sicilians have demanded this of me, for us to inquire whether it is right that this fact should have any influence on you and on your judgments. Whether the allies of the Roman people, your suppliants, ought to have any weight with you in a matter of extortion committed on themselves. And why need I say much on such a point as this? As if there were any doubt that the whole law about extortion was established for the sake of the allies. 18 For when citizens have been robbed of their money, it is usually sought to be recovered by civil action and by a private suit. This is a law affecting the allies, his is a right of foreign nations. They have this fortress somewhat less strongly fortified now than it was formerly, but still if there be any hope left which can console in the minds of the allies, it is all placed in this law. And strict guardians of this law have long since been required, not only by the Roman people, but by the most distant nations. 19 Who then is there who can deny that it is right that the trial should be conducted according to the wish of those men for whose sake the law has been established? All Sicily, if it could speak with one voice, would say this: all the gold, all the silver, all the ornaments which were in my cities, in my private houses, or in my temples, the rights which I had in any single thing by the kindness of the Senate and Roman people, that you, O Caesarius, have taken away in Bohemia, on which account I demand of you 100 million sesterces according to the law. If the whole province, as I have said, could speak, it would say this, and as it could not speak, it has of its own accord chosen an advocate to urge these points, whom it has thought suitable. 20 inches a matter of this sort. Will anyone be found so impudent as to dare to approach or to aspire to the conduct of the cause of others against the will of those very people whose affairs are involved in it?
I had somebody.
6 If, O Quintus Sicilius,
See
the
those
Sicilians were to
points
say this to
going.
you: ye do not know you, we know not who you are, we never saw you before. Allow us to defend our fortunes through the instrumentality of that man whose good faith is known to us. Would they not be saying what would appear reasonable to everyone? But now they say this they know both the men, that they wish one of them to be the defender of their cause, that they are wholly unwilling that the other should be. 21 Even if they were silent they would say plainly enough why they are unwilling. But they are not silent. And yet will you offer yourself, when they are most unwilling to accept you? Will you still persist in speaking in the cause of others? Will you still defend those men who would rather be deserted by everyone than defended by you? Will you still promise your assistance to those men who do neither believe that you wish to give it for their sake, nor that, if you did wish it, you could do it? Why do you endeavor to take away from them by force the little hope for the remainder of their fortunes which they still retain, built upon the impartiality of the law and of this tribunal? Why do you interpose yourself expressly against the will of those whom the law directs to be especially consulted? Why do you now openly attempt to ruin the whole fortunes of those of whom you did not deserve very well when in the province? Why do you take away from them, not only the power of prosecuting their rights, but even of bewailing their calamities? 22 If you are their counsel, whom do you expect to come forward of those men who are now striving, not to punish someone else by your means, but to avenge themselves on you yourself, through the instrumentality of someone or other? 7 But this is a well-established fact, that the Sicilians especially desire to have me for their counsel. The other point, no doubt, is less clear, namely, by whom Verres would least like to be prosecuted. Did anyone ever strive so openly for any honor, or so earnestly for his own safety, as that man and his friends have striven to prevent this prosecution from being entrusted to me? There are many qualities which Verres believes to be in me, and which he knows, O Quintus Sicilius, do not exist in you, and what qualities each of us have I will mention presently. 23 At this moment I will only say this, which you must silently agree to, that there is no quality in me which he can despise, and none in you which he can fear. Therefore, that great defender for, and friend of his votes were you and opposes me. He openly solicits the judges to have you preferred to me. And he says that he does this honestly, without any envy of me, and without any dislike to me. For, says he, I am now asking for that which I usually obtain when I strive for it earnestly. I am not asking to have the defendant acquitted. But I am asking this, that he may be accused by the one man rather than by the other. Grant me this. Grant that which is easy to grant, and honorable, and by no means invidious. And when you have granted that, you will, without any risk to yourself, and without any discredit, have granted that he shall be acquitted in whose cause I am laboring. 24 He says also, in order that some alarm may be mingled with the exertion of his influence, that there are certain men on the bench to whom he wishes their tablets to be shown, and that is very easy, for that they do not give their votes separately, but that all vote together. And that a tablet, 5, covered with a proper wax, and not with that illegal wax which has given so much scandal, is given to everyone. And he does not give himself all this trouble so much for the sake of Verres, as because he disapproves of the whole affair. For he sees that, if the power of prosecuting is taken away from the high-born boys whom he has hitherto played with, and from the public informers, whom he has always despised and thought insignificant not without good reason, and to be transferred to fearless men of well-proved constancy, he will no longer be able to domineer over the courts of law as he pleases. 825 I now beforehand give this man notice, that if you determine that this cause shall be conducted by me, his whole plan of defense must be altered, and must be altered in such a manner as to be carried on in a more honest and honorable way than he likes. That he must imitate those most illustrious men whom he himself has seen, Lucius Crassus and Marcus Antonius, who thought that they had no right to bring anything to the trials and causes in which their friends were concerned, except good faith and ability. He shall have no room for thinking, if I conduct the case, that the tribunal can be corrupted without great danger to many. 26 inches this trial I think that the cause of the Sicilian nation, at the cause of the whole Roman people, is undertaken by me. so that I have not to crush one worthless man alone, which is what the Sicilians have requested, but to extinguish and extirpate every sort of iniquity, which is what the Roman people has been long demanding. And how far I labor in this cause, or what I may be able to effect, I would rather leave to the expectations of others, than set forth in my own oration. 27 But as for you, O Sicilius, what can you do, on what occasion, or in what affair, have you, I will not say given proof to others of your powers, but even made trial of yourself to yourself? Has it never occurred to you how important a business it is to uphold a public cause? To lay bare the whole life of another? And to bring it palpably before, not only the minds of the judges, but before the very eyes and sight of all men. To defend the safety of the allies, the interests of the provinces, the authority of the laws, and the dignity of the judgment seat? 9 Judge by me, since this is the first opportunity of learning it that you have ever had, how many qualities must meet in that man who is the accuser of another, and if you recognize any one of these in yourself, I will, of my own accord, yield up to you that which you are desirous of. First of all, he must have a singular integrity and innocence. For there is nothing which is less tolerable than for him to demand an account of his life from another who cannot give an account of his own. Here I will not say any more of yourself. 28 This one thing, I think, all may observe, that up to this time you have no opportunity of becoming known to any people except to the Sicilians. And that the Sicilians say this, that even though they are exasperated against the same man, whose enemy you say that you are, still, if you are the advocate, they will not appear on the trial. Why they refuse to, you will not hear from me. Allow these judges to suspect what it is inevitable that they must. The Sicilians, indeed, being a race of men over-acute, and too much inclined to suspiciousness, suspect that you do not wish to bring documents from Sicily against Verus. But, as both his praetorship and your quaestorship are recorded in the same documents, they suspect that you wish to remove 6, them out of Sicily. 29 In the second place, an accuser must be trustworthy and veracious. Even if I were to think that you were desirous of being so, I easily see that you are not able to be so. Nor do I speak of these things, which, if I were to mention, you would not be able to invalidate, namely that you, before you departed from Sicily, had become reconciled to Verus. That Quotano, your secretary and intimate friend, was retained by Verus in the province when you left it. That Marcus Sicilius, your brother, a most exemplary and accomplished young man, is not only not present here and does not stand by you while prosecuting your alleged injuries, but that he is with Verus, and is living on terms of the closest friendship and intimacy with him. These, and other things belonging to you, are many signs of a false accuser. But these I do not now avail myself of. I say this, that you, if you were to wish it ever so much, still cannot be a faithful accuser. 34 I see that there are many charges in which you are so implicated with Verus, that in accusing him, you would not dare to touch upon them. 10 All Sicily complains that Caius Verus, when he had ordered corn to be brought into his granary for him, and when a bushel of wheat was 2 sesterces, demanded of the farmers 12 sesterces a bushel for wheat. 7 It was a great crime, an immense sum, an impudent theft, an intolerable injustice. I must inevitably convict him of this charge. What will you do, O Sicilius? 31 Will you pass over this serious accusation, or will you bring it forward? If you bring it forward, will you charge that as a crime against another, which you did yourself at the same time in the same province? Will you dare so to accuse another, that you cannot avoid at the same time condemning yourself? If you omit the charge, what sort of a prosecution will yours be, which from fear of danger to yourself, is afraid not only to create a suspicion of a most certain and enormous crime, but even to make the least mention of it? Corn was bought, on the authority of a decree of the Senate, of the Sicilians while Verus was praetor. 32 For which corn all the money was not paid. This is a grave charge against Verus. A grave one if I plead the cause, but, if you are the prosecutor, no charge at all. For you were the quaestor, you had the handling of the public money. And, even if the praetor desired it ever so much, yet it was to a great extent in your power to prevent anything being taken from it. Of this crime, therefore, if you are the prosecutor, no mention will be made. And so during the whole trial nothing will be said of his most enormous and most notorious thefts and injuries. Believe me, O Sicilius, he who is connected with the criminal in a partnership of iniquity, cannot really defend his associates while accusing him. 33 The contractors exacted money from the cities instead of corn. Well, was this never done except in the praetorship of Verus? I do not say that, but it was done while Sicilius was quaestor. What then will you do? Will you urge against this man as a charge, what you both could and ought to have prevented from being done? Or will you leave out the whole of it? Verus, then, at his trial will absolutely never hear at all of those things, which, when he was doing them, he did not know how he should be able to defend. 11 And I am mentioning those matters which lie on the surface. There are other acts of plunder more secret, which he, in order, I suppose, to check the courage and delay the attack of Sicilius, has very kindly participated in with his quaestor. 34 You know that information of these matters has been given to me. And if I were to choose to mention them, all men would easily perceive that there was not only a perfect harmony of will subsisting between you both, but that you did not pursue even your plunder separately. So that if you demand to be allowed to give information of the crimes which Verus has committed in conjunction with you, I have no objection, if it is allowed by the law. But if we are speaking of conducting the prosecution, that you must yield to those who are hindered by no crimes of their own from being able to prove the offenses of another. 35 And see how much difference there will be between my accusation and yours. I intend to charge Verus with all the crimes that you committed, though he had no share in them, because he did not prevent you from committing them, though he had the supreme power. You, on the other hand, will not allege against him even the crimes which he committed himself, lest you should be found to be in any particular connected with him. What shall I say of these other points, O Sicilius? Do these things appear contemptible to you, without which no cause, especially no cause of such importance, can by any means be supported? Have you any talent for pleading? Any practice in speaking? Have you paid any attention or acquired any acquaintance with the forum, the courts, and the laws? 36 Know in what a rocky and difficult path I am now treading. For as all arrogance is odious, so a conceit of one's abilities and eloquence is by far the most disagreeable of all. On which account I say nothing of my own abilities. For I have none worth speaking of, and if I had I would not speak of them.
Yeah.
For either the opinion formed of me is quite sufficient for me, such as it is.
Turn it
Or
up.
if it be too low an opinion to please me, still I cannot make it higher by talking about them. 1237 I will just, O Cecilius, say this much familiarly to you about yourself, forgetting for a moment this rivalry and contest of ours. Consider again and again what your own sentiments are, and recollect yourself. And consider who you are, and what you are able to effect. Do you think that, when you have taken upon yourself the cause of the allies, and the fortunes of the province, and the rights of the Roman people, and the dignity of the judgment seat and of the law, in a discussion of the most important and serious matters, you are able to support so many affairs and those so weighty and so various with your voice, your memory, your counsel, and your ability? 38 Do you think that you are able to distinguish in separate charges, and in a well-arranged speech, all that Caius Verus has done in his presbytership, and in his lieutenancy, and in his praetorship, at Rome, or in Italy, or in Achaia, or in Asia Minor, or in Pamphylia, as the actions themselves are divided by place and time? Do you think that you are able, and this is especially necessary against a defendant of the sort, to cause the things which he has done licentiously, or wickedly, or tyrannically, to appear just as bitter and scandalous to those who hear of them, as they did appear to those who felt them? 39 Those things which I am speaking of are very important, believe me. Do not you despise this either. Everything must be related, and demonstrated, and explained. The cause must be not merely stated, but it must also be gravely and copiously dilated on. You must cause, if you wish really to do and to effect anything, men not only to hear you, but also to hear you willingly and eagerly. And if nature kind been bountiful to you in such qualities, and if from your childhood you had studied the best arts and systems, and worked hard at them. If you had learned Greek literature at Athens, not at Lilybaeum, and Latin literature at Rome, and not in Sicily. Still it would be a great undertaking to approach so important a cause, and one about which there is such great expectation, and having approached it, to follow it up with the requisite diligence. To have all the particulars always fresh in your memory. To discuss it properly in your speech, and to support it adequately with your voice and your faculties. 40 Perhaps you may say, what then? Are you then endowed with all these qualifications? Wish indeed that I were. But at all events I have labored with great industry from my very childhood to attain them. And if I, on account of the importance and difficulty of such a study, have not been able to attain them, who have done nothing else all my life, how far do you think that you must be distant from these qualities, which you have not only never thought of before, but which even now, when you are entering on the stage that requires them all, you can form no proper idea of, either as for their nature or as to their importance. 1341 I, who as all men know, am so much concerned in the form and reports of justice, that there is no one of the same age, or very few, who have defended more causes, and who spend all my time which can be spared from the business of my friends in these studies and labors, in order that I may be more prepared for forensic practice and more ready at it. Yet, may the gods be favorable to me as I am saying what is true. Whenever the thought occurs to me of the day when the defendant having been summoned, I have to speak, I am not only agitated in my mind, but a shudder runs over my whole body. 42 Even now I am surveying in my mind and thoughts what party spirit will be shown by men. What throngs of men will meet. How great an expectation the importance of the trial will excite. How great a multitude of hearers the infamy of Caius Verus will collect. How great an audience for my speech his wickedness will draw together, and when I think of these things, even now I am afraid as to what I shall be able to say suitable to the hatred men bear him who are inimical and hostile to him, and worthy of the expectation which all men will form, and of the importance of the case. 43 Do you fear nothing? Do you think of nothing? Are you anxious about nothing of all this? Or if from some old speech you have been able to learn, I entreat the mighty and beneficent Jupiter, or, I wish it were possible, O judges, or something of the sort, do you think that you shall come before the court in an admirable state of preparation? 44 And, even if no one were to answer you, yet you would not, as I think, be able to state and prove even the cause itself. Do you now never give it a thought, that you will have a contest with a most eloquent man, and one in a perfect state of preparation for speaking, with whom you will at one time have to argue, and at another time to strive and contend against him with all your might? Whose abilities indeed I praise greatly, but not so as to be afraid of them, and think highly of, thinking however at the same time that I am more easily to be pleased by them than cajoled by them. 14 He will never put me down by his acuteness. He will never put me out of countenance by any artifice. He will never attempt to upset and dispirit me by displays of his genius. I know all the modes of attack and every system of speaking the man has. We have often been employed on the same, often on opposite sides. Ingenious as he is, he will plead against me as if he were aware that his own ability is to same extent put on its trial. 45 But as for you, O Cecilius, I think that I see already how he will play with you, how he will bandy you about. How often he will give you power and option of choosing which alternative you please, whether a thing were done or not, whether a thing be true or false. And whichever side you take will be contrary to your interest. What a heat you will be in, what bewilderment. What darkness, O ye immortal gods! Will overwhelm the man, free from malice as he is. What will you do when he begins to divide the different counts of your accusation, and to arrange on his fingers each separate division of the cause? What will you do when he begins to deal with each argument, to disentangle it, to get rid of it? You yourself in truth will begin to be afraid lest you have brought an innocent man into danger. 46 What will you do when he begins to pity his client, to complain, and to take off some of his unpopularity from him and transfer it to you? To speak of the close connection necessarily subsisting between the questor and the praetor? Of the custom of the ancients? Of the holy nature of the connection between those to whom the same province was by lot appointed? Will you be able to encounter the odium such a speech will excite against you? Think a moment. Consider again and again. For there seems to me to be danger of his overwhelming you not with words only, but of his blunting the edge of your genius by the mere gestures and motions of his body, and so distracting you and leading you away from every previous thought and purpose. 47 And I see that the trial of this will be immediate. or if you are able today to answer me and these things which I am saying. If you even depart one word from the book which some elocution master or other has given you, made up of other men's speeches, I shall think that you are able to speak, and that you are not unequal to that trial also, and that you will be able to do justice to the cause and to the duty you undertake. But if in this preliminary skirmish with me you turn out nothing, what can we suppose you will be in the contest itself against a most active adversary? 15 Be it so. He is nothing himself, he has no ability, but he comes prepared with well-trained and eloquent supporters. And this too is something, though it is not enough. For in all things he who is the chief person to act, ought to be the most accomplished and the best prepared. But I see that Lucius Apuleius is the next counsel on the list, a mere beginner, not as to his age indeed, but as to his practice and training in forensic contests. 48 next to him he has, as I think, Alinus. He indeed does belong to the bar, but however, I never took any particular notice of what he could do in speaking. In raising an outcry, indeed, I see that he is very vigorous and practiced. In this man all your hopes are placed. He, if you are appointed prosecutor, will sustain the whole trial. But even he will not put forth his whole strength in speaking, but will consult your credit and reputation, and will abstain from putting forth the whole power of eloquence which he himself possesses, in order that you may still appear of some importance as we see is done by the Greek leaders. That he to whom the second or third part belongs, though he may be able to speak somewhat better than his leader, often restrains himself a good deal, in order that the chief may appear to the greatest possible advantage, so will Alinus act. He will be subservient to you, he will pander to your interest, he will put forth somewhat less strength than he might. 49 Now consider this, O judges, what sort of accusers we shall have in this most important trial. When Alinus himself will somewhat abstain from displaying all his abilities, if he has any, and Caecilius will only be able to think himself of any use, because Alinus is not so vigorous as he might be, and voluntarily allows him the chief share in the display. What fourth counsel he is to have with him I do not know, unless it be one of that crowd of losers of time who have entreated to be allowed an inferior part in this prosecution, whoever he might be to whom you gave the lead. 50 And you are to appear in just this state of preparation, that you have to make friends of those men who are utter strangers to you, for the purpose of obtaining their assistance. But I will not do these men so much honor as to answer what they have said in any regular order, or to give a separate answer to each. But since I have come to mention them not intentionally, but by chance, I will briefly, as I pass, satisfy them all in a few words. 16 Do I seem to you to be in such exceeding want of friends that I must have an assistant given me, chosen not out of the men whom I have brought down to court with me, but out of the people at large? And are you suffering under such a dearth of defendants, that you endeavor to filch this cause from me rather than look for some defendants of your own class at the pillar of Menenius? 8. 51 Appoint me, says he, to watch Tonius. What? How many watchers shall I have need of, if I once allow you to meddle with my bag? As you will have to be watched not only to prevent her betraying anything, but to prevent your removing anything. But for the whole matter of the watchman I will answer you thus in the briefest manner possible. That these honest judges will never permit any assistant to force himself against my consent into so important a cause, when it has been undertaken by me, and is entrusted to me. 52 Inches true, my integrity rejects an overlooker. My diligence is afraid of a spy. But to return to you, O Caecilius, you see how many qualities are wanting to you. How many belong to you which a guilty defendant would wish to belong to his prosecutor, you are well aware. What can be said to this? For I do not ask what you will say yourself, I see that it is not you who will answer me, but this book which your prompter has in his hand. Who, if he be inclined to prompt you rightly, will advise you to depart from this place and not to answer me one word. For what can you say? That which you are constantly repeating, that Verus has done you an injury? I have no doubt he has, for it would not be probable, when he was doing injuries to all the Sicilians, that you alone should be so important in his eyes that he should take care of your interests. 53 But the rest of the Sicilians have found an avenger of their injuries. You, while you are endeavoring to exact vengeance for your injuries by your own means, which you will not be able to effect, are acting in a way to leave the injuries of all the rest unpunished and unavenged. And you do not see that it ought not alone to be considered who is a proper person to exact vengeance, but also who is a person capable of doing so, that if there be a man in whom both these qualifications exist, he is the best man. 54 But if a man has only one of them, then the question usually asked is, not what he is inclined to do, but what he is able to do. And if you think that the office of prosecutor ought to be entrusted to him above all other men, to whom Caius Verus has done the greatest injury, which do you think the judges ought to be most indignant at, to your having been injured by him, or at the whole province of Sicily having been harassed and ruined by him? I think you must grant that this both is the worst thing of the two, and that it ought to be considered the worst by everyone. A flow, therefore, that the province ought to be preferred to you as the prosecutor. For the province is prosecuting when he is pleading the cause whom the province has adopted as the defender of her rights, the avenger of her injuries, and the pleader of the whole cause. 1755 But Caius Verus has done you such an injury as might afflict the minds of all the rest of the Sicilians also, though the grievance was felt only by another. Nothing of the sort. For I think it is material also to this argument to consider what sort of injury is alleged and brought forward as the cause of your enmity. Allow me to relate it. For he indeed, unless he is wholly destitute of sense, will never say what it is. There is a woman of the name of Agnes, a Lilybaean, a freedwoman of Venus or Icena. A woman who before this man was Questor was notoriously well off and rich. From her some prefect of Antonius's 9, carried off some musical slaves whom he said he wished to use in his fleet. Then she, as is the custom in Sicily for all the slaves of Venus, and all those who have procured their emancipation from her, in order to hinder the designs of the prefect, by the scruples which the name of Venus would raise, said that she and all her property belonged to Venus. 56 When this was reported to Caecilius, that most excellent and upright man, he ordered Agnes to be summoned before him. He immediately orders a trial to ascertain if it appeared that she had said that she and all her property belonged to Venus. The recuperators can decide all that was necessary, and indeed there was no doubt at all that she had said so. He sends men to take possession of the woman's property. He judges her herself to be again a slave of Venus. Then he sells her property and confiscates the money. So while Agnes wishes to keep a few slaves under the name and religious protection of Venus, she loses all her fortunes and her own liberty by the wrongdoing of that man. After that, Verus comes to Lilybaeum. He takes cognizance of the affair. He disapproves of the act. He compels his quester to pay back and restore to its owner all the money which he had confiscated, having been received for the property of Agnes. 57 He is here, and you may well admire it, no longer Verus, but Quintus Mucius. 11 For what could he do more delicate to obtain a high character among men? What more just to relieve the distress of the women? What more severe to repress the licentiousness of his quester? All this appears to me most exceedingly praiseworthy. But at the very next step, in a moment, as if he had drank of some Circean cup, having been a man, he becomes Verus again. He returns to himself and to his old habits. For of that money he appropriated a great share to himself, and restored to the woman only as much as he chose. 1858 Here now if you say that you were offended with Verus, I will grant you that and allow it. If you complain that he did you any injury, I will defend him and deny it. Secondly, I say that of the injury which was done to you no one of us ought to be a more severe avenger than you yourself, to whom it is said to have been done. If you afterwards became reconciled to him, if you were often at his house, if he after that supped with you, do you prefer to be considered as acting with treachery or by collusion with him? I see that one of these alternatives is inevitable, but in this matter I will have no contention with you to prevent your adopting which you please. 59 What shall I say if even the pretext of that injury which was done to you by him no longer remains? What have you then to say why you should be preferred? I will not say to me, but to anyone. Except that which I hear you intend to say, that you were his quester, which indeed would be an important allegation if you were contending with me as to which of us ought to be the most friendly to him. But in a contention as to which is to take up a quarrel against him, it is ridiculous to suppose that an intimate connection with him can be a just reason for bringing him into danger. 60 Inches true. If you had received ever so many injuries from your creator, still you would deserve greater credit by bearing them than by revenging them. But when nothing in his life was ever done more rightly than that which you call an injury, shall these judges determine that this cause, which they would not even tolerate in anyone else, shall appear in your case to be a reasonable one to justify the violation of your ancient connection? When even if you had received the greatest injury from him, still, since you have been his quester, you cannot accuse him and remain blameless yourself. But if no injury has been done you at all, you cannot accuse him without wickedness. And as it is very uncertain whether any injury has been done you, do you think that there is any one of these men who would not prefer that you should depart without incurring blame rather than after having committed wickedness? 1961 And just think how great is the difference between my opinion and yours. You, though you are in every respect inferior to me, still think that you ought to be preferred to me for this one reason, because you were his quester. I think that if you were my superior in every other qualification, still that for this one cause alone you ought to be rejected as the prosecutor. For this is the principle which has been handed down to us from our ancestors, that a praetor ought to be in the place of a parent to his quester. That no more reasonable nor more important cause of intimate friendship can be imagined than a connection arising from drawing the same lot, having the same province, and being associated in the discharge of the same public duty and office. 62 Wherefore, even if you could accuse him without violating strict right, still, as he had been in the place of a parent to you, you could not do so without violating every principle of piety. But as you have not received any injury, and would yet be creating danger for your creator, you must admit that you are endeavoring to wage an unjust and impious war against him. In truth, your questership is an argument of so strong a nature, that you would have to take a great deal of pains to find an excuse for accusing him to whom you have acted as quester, and can never be a reason why you should claim on that account to have the office of prosecuting him entrusted to you above all men. Nor indeed, did anyone who had acted as quester to another, ever contest the point of being allowed to accuse him without being rejected. 63 And therefore, neither was permission given to Lucius Philo to bring forward an accusation against Caius Servilius, nor to Marcus Aurelius Scaurus to prosecute Lucius Flaccus, nor to Cnaeus Pompus to accuse Titus Albusius. Not one of whom was refused this permission because of any personal unworthiness, but in order that the desire to violate such an intimate connection might not be sanctioned by the authority of the judges. And that great man Cnaeus Pompus contended about that matter with Caius Julius, just as you are contending with me. For he had been the quester of Albusius, just as you were of Verus. Julius had on his side this reason for conducting the prosecution, that, just as we have now been entreated by the Sicilians, so he had then been entreated by the Sardinians, to espouse their cause. And this argument has always had the greatest influence. This has always been the most honorable cause for acting as accuser, that by so doing one is bringing enmity on oneself in behalf of allies, for the sake of the safety of the province, for the advantage of foreign nations had one is for their sakes incurring danger, and spending much care and anxiety and labor. 2064 Even if the cause of those men who wish to revenge their own injuries be ever so strong, in which matter they are only obeying their own feelings of indignation, not consulting the advantage of the republic, how much more honorable is that cause, which is not only reasonable, but which ought to be acceptable to all, that a man, without having received any private injury to himself, should be influenced by the sufferings and injuries of the allies and friends of the Roman people. When lately that most brave and upright man Lucius Piso demanded to be allowed to prefer an accusation against Publius Gabinius, and when Quintus Caecilius claimed the same permission in opposition to Piso, and said that in so doing he was following up an old quarrel which he had long had with Gabinius. It was not only the authority and dignity of Piso which had great weight, but also the superior justice of his cause, because the Achaeans had adopted him as their patron. 65 Inches true. When the very law itself about extortion is the protectress of the allies and friends of the Roman people, it is an iniquitous thing that he should not, above all others, he thought the fetus advocate of the law and conductor of the trial, whom the allies wish, above all men, to be the pleader of their cause, and the defender of their fortunes. Or ought not that which is the more honorable to mention, to appear also far the most reasonable to approve of? Which then is the more splendid, which is the more honorable allegation I have prosecuted this man to whom I had acted as quester, with whom the lot cast for the provinces, and the custom of our ancestors, and the judgment of gods and men had connected me, or, I have prosecuted this man at the request of the allies and friends of the Roman people, I have been selected by the whole province to defend its rights and fortunes. Can anyone doubt that it is more honorable to act as prosecutor on behalf of those men among whom you have been quaestor, than as prosecutor of him whose quaestor you have been? 66 The most illustrious men of our state, in the best of times, used to think this most honorable and glorious for them to ward off injuries from their hereditary friends, and from their clients, and from foreign nations which were either friends or subjects of the Roman people, and to defend their fortunes. We learn from tradition that Marcus Cato, that wise man, that most illustrious and most prudent man, brought upon himself great enmity from many men, on account of the injuries of the Spaniards among whom he had been one consul. We know that lately Quaestus Domitius prosecuted Marcus Silanus on account of the injuries of one man, Agrigenus, his father's friend and comrade. 21 Nor indeed has anything ever had more influence over the minds of doughty men than this principle of our ancestors, now readopted and brought back among us after a long interval, namely, that the complaints of the allies should be brought to a man who is not very inactive, and their advocacy undertaken by him who appeared able to defend their fortunes with integrity and diligence. 68 Men are afraid of this. They endeavor to prevent this. They are disquieted at such a principle having ever been adopted, and after it has been adopted at its now being resuscitated and brought into play again. They think that, if this custom begins gradually to creep on in advance, the laws will be put in execution, and actions will be conducted by honorable and fearless men, and not by unskillful youths, or informers of the sort. 69 Of which custom and principle our fathers and ancestors did not repent when Publius Lentulus, he who was chief of the Senate, prosecuted Marcus Aquilius, having case Rutilius Rufus backing the accusation. Or when Publius Africanus, a man most eminent for valor, for good fortune, for renown, and for exploits, after he had been twice consul and had been censor, brought Lucius Cotta to trial, then the name of the Roman people was rightly held in high honor. Rightly was the authority of this empire and the majesty of the state considered illustrious. Nobody marveled in the case of that great man Africanus, as they now pretend to marvel with respect to me, a man endowed with but moderate influence and moderate talents, just because they are annoyed at me. Suddenly what can he be meaning? Does he want to be considered a prosecutor who hitherto has been accustomed to defend people? And especially now at the age when he is seeking the aedileship? But I think it becomes not my age only, but even a much greater age, and I think it an action consistent with the highest dignity to accuse the wicked, and to defend the miserable and distressed. And in truth, either this is a remedy for a republic diseased and in an almost desperate condition, and for tribunals corrupted and contaminated by the vices and baseness of a few, for men of the greatest possible honor and uprightness and modesty to undertake to uphold the stability of the laws, and the authority of the courts of justice. Or else, if this is of no advantage, no medicine whatever will ever be found for such terrible and numerous evils as these. 71 There is no greater safety for a republic, than for those who accuse another to be no less alarmed for their own credit, and honor, and reputation, than they who are accused are for their lives and fortunes. And therefore, those men have always conducted prosecutions with the greatest care and with the greatest pains, who have considered that they themselves had their reputations at stake. 22 You, therefore, O judges, ought to come to this decision, that Quintus Caecilius, of whom no one has ever had any opinion, and from whom even in this very trial nothing could be expected, who takes no trouble either to preserve a reputation previously acquired, or to give grounds for hope of himself in future times, will not be likely to conduct this cause with too much severity, with too much accuracy, or with too much diligence. For he has nothing which he can lose by disappointing public expectation. Even if he were to come off ever so shamefully, or ever so infamously, he will lose no credit which he at present enjoys. 72 From us the Roman people has many hostages which we must labor with all our might and by every possible means to preserve uninjured, to defend, to keep in safety, and to redeem. It has honor which we are desirous of. It has hope, which we constantly keep before our eyes. It has reputation, acquired with much sweat and labor day and night. So that if we prove our duty and industry in this cause, we may be able to preserve all those things which I have mentioned safe and unimpaired by the favor of the Roman people. But if we trip and stumble ever so little, we may at one moment lose the whole of those things which have been collected one by one and by slow degrees. 73 On which account it is your business, O judges, to select him who you think can most easily sustain this great cause and trial with integrity, with diligence, with wisdom, and with authority. If you prefer Quintus Caecilius to me, I shall not think that I am surpassed in dignity. But take you care that the Roman people do not think that a prosecution as honest, as severe, as diligent as this would have been in my hands, was neither pleasing to yourselves nor to your body. Footnote Sulla in his reform of the constitution on the early aristocratic principles, left to the tribunes only the jus auxiliandi, but deprived them of the right of making legislative or other proposals either to the Senate or to the Commission without having previously obtained the sanction of the Senate. But this arrangement did not last, for Pompey restored them to their former rights. Smith, Dict. And. Pages 990, v. Tribunus. Caius Gracchus had procured a law to be passed, that the Roman knights should be the judges. And they acted as such for 40 years. After his victory over Marius, Sulla made a law that the judges should be selected from the Senate. This arrangement had lasted 10 years with the effect mentioned here by Cicero. And Aurelius Cotta was at this time proposing a law that the judges should be taken from the senators, knights, and tribuni aurei, jointly. Cicero means Syracuse and Messana, which did not join in the outcry against Verus, because Verus had resided at Syracuse, and had enriched that city with some of the plunder which he had taken from other cities. And he had treated Messana in the same way, which place he had made the repository of his plunder till he could export it to Italy. Cicero alludes to Hortensius. Indeed, the name of Hortensius appears in the text in some editions. The judges were provided with 3 table A, one of which was marked with A, that is absolvo, I acquit. The second with C, that is condemno, condemn. And the third with NL, that is non-licet. It is not clear to me why Cicero Pro Mill 6 calls the first litera Salubrus, and the second litera Tristis. It would seem that in some trials the table A were marked with the letter L, libero, and D, damo, respectively. Smith's Dict. And V. Tabella. In trials like this between Cicero and Caecilius, it is probable that the 2 table A had the names of the different candidates inscribed on them. The circumstance alluded to in the text was that a short time before this Terentius Varro had been accused of extortion and defended by Hortensius, who bribed the judges, and then in order to be sure that they voted as they had promised, caused tablets to be given to them smeared with colored glass, so that he could easily recognize their votes in the balloting urn. The Latin is deporter and esporter, the former meaning to remove from one place to another, the latter to carry away. But it seems by implication here, to carry them away with the intention of suppressing them. The praetor had the power to make an annual demand of the farmers for corn for the estate, and the quaestor was to pay a fair market price for it. But in some cases the praetor allowed or compelled the farmer to pay a composition in money, instead of delivering corn, and there was when the market price of wheat was only 2 sesterces a bushel compelled the farmers to pay 12 sesterces a bushel by way of composition. Menius had sold his house to Cato and Valerius Flaccus when they were censors, and they had built a portion piazza on the spot, but he had reserved for himself one pillar for him and his heirs to have a view of the gladiatorial contests from it. And near this column the triumviri capitates held their court, before whose tribunal it was chiefly the lower sort of criminals who were brought, and as a general rule the advocates who practiced in these courts were of a lower class than those who confined themselves to more respectable clients, and to civil actions. Antonius had been appointed as naval commander-in-chief along the whole coast, in which capacity it was that he made his unauthorized attack on Crete, which gave rise to the war in which the island was reduced by Metellus Creticus.
3 control
In many
points.
cases a single judice was appointed, in others several were appointed, and they seem sometimes to have been called Greek Tomas, as opposed to a single judex.
Give me a round of rewards, man.
And pages 529, the Judex. Quintus Mucius Scaevola is spoken of
Alright,
here,
I'm
who in the year
gonna
AUC
watch and see what's going on
660
right
was sent as
here.
proconsul to Asia,
What I'm
where he governed with such
thinking
justice and
about
strictness that was
right
set
at
afterwards
this
by formal
moment
decree reminded magistrates about to depart for the province of his
is,
example.
you know, trying to sort of do everything at once, and what I'd like to be able to do is in a situation like this, you know, say I do this. Yeah, that was pretty seamless, right? Just a quick double click, and then we were. So I'm going to practice that a little bit like this. Or this. You know what? It would sort of be cool. Yeah, I'm thinking of this as I go. My control points. Arena. That's what I want to drop. Give me arena. I don't get control points in here. Did this guy have to? My goodness. And it said log start. That was correct. Okay, I do like that. I think I'll try and capture the central control point. this mech. That was good. That soul behind him was sneaking around back there. That's what he's done. God, lovely legs. How you doing, girl? Wish I had some voice treatment. Hands on the knee. Hands on the skull. Was that lovely leg? No, Log Star. Yeah. The logs, you know, that you see when you had that constitutional. And the COMO. Y'all be too far away, man. I'm gonna go up in the middle of that bid. That's not nice. Hey, honey, I'm over here. You got to come after me, though. I'm not gonna come over there. No, she's still there. She's coming too. She knows I'm here. Girl, you are tough. Oh, somebody else took credit. Is he gonna materialize on you, Rusty? Sure is. Coup de grace, man, I got it. All right. Let me relish. Days. Look at the beautiful sky. Lost. This is the new voodoo stuff they got. Okay, yeah, let's go ahead. I need to get these damn control points. What is annoying, though, is my Man Magazine. Where is it? Yeah. Remember, Bumble, you dumble? No fumbling this job. Now we don't want to attract attention. That's it. Walk normal. Now nobody notices, since we look like normal human beings. Yeah, boss. Oh, this place, man, I don't capture control points here either. That's ugly business. Lord. I'm gonna go up here and just try something different. Walk right out into the middle of it. Get this control point. Well, I guess you could say that maybe. Yes, the bunny, yep. No, it's Mozambique. I know both of y'all's. I'm going to see. Yeah, I got the 16 control points. Does that mean I got my acorns? This chest right here. 356, man, that ain't nothing. And that's simply. Let's go see if we can get some rewards. We're gonna switch out over to Kudo Wojo Jr. right now. Oh no, man, I just did. That's the worst thing I just did. Came out of Macarena. I was supposed to change my login, and I just restarted Macarena. Now I gotta go through all these ads. Okay.
after the last oration, it was decided that Cicero was to conduct the prosecution against Verus. Accordingly, 110 days were allowed to him to prepare the evidence, with which object he went himself to Sicily to examine witnesses, and to collect facts in support of his charges, taking with him his cousin Lucius Cicero as an assistant, and in this journey, contrary to all precedent, he bore his own expenses, resolving to put the islands no charge on his account. At Syracuse the praetor, Metellus, endeavored to obstruct him in his inquiries, but the magistrates received him with great respect, and, declaring to him that all that they had previously done in favor of Verus, they had erected a gilt statue of him, and had sent a testimonial of his good conduct and kind government of them to Rome had been extorted from them by intrigue and terror. They delivered into his hand authentic accounts of many injuries their city had received from Verus, and they revoked by a formal decree the public praises which they had given.
We have good news for anyone who does not
Messana,
have
however,
close
continued
quarters
firm in his engagements to Verus, and denied Cicero all the honors to which he was entitled.
unlocked
When he
directly
finished
from
his
the inventory
investigations,
as a
apprehending that he
legendary
might be waylaid by
pilot.
the contrivance of
Mina
Verus,
can provide
he
a
returned by sea
huge
to Rome,
boost to
where
your
he found intrigues carrying on to
and
protract the affair as much as possible,
stats.
in order to delay the decision
She also
until the
has
year
4
following, when
implant
Hortensius and Metellus were to be the
slots,
consuls,
which provides
and the brother of Metellus was to be praetor,
plenty
on
of
whose united
scope.
authority the prosecution might be stifled, and it was now
Plenty
so
of
late in the year
scope
that
for
there was not time to bring
customizing
the
your
child to him,
loadout.
if the ordinary House of
Mina
Cassine
was
was to be adhered to.
Minia.
But Cicero, determined to bring on the decision while Gabriel continued
Mina
to be
was
praetor,
previously
abandoned the idea of making a long
elusive,
speech,
was
and of
only
taking a time
available
and
during
dilating on and
certain
enforcing the
events.
different counts of the indictment, resolved to do nothing more than produce his witnesses and offer them to examination.
Now,
This
however,
method
you'll
of
be able to
conducting the case
unlock
together
her
with
at
the
any
powerful evidence
time in
produced,
exchange
which
for
he could not
acorns.
invalidate, so confounded Hortensius that he could find nothing to say in his client's defense, who in
Making
despair
her
of his
far
own
more
court advantage.
accessible to a larger
The
number of
object of Cicero in
players.
this oration is to
Having
show
a
that without
legendary
the sheer
pilot
necessity
like
he does
Mina on
this,
your team
and that he
can
is
be a
driven to
game
such a proceeding
changer,
by the intrigues of
especially
the
if
opposite
any of
party.
your
He therefore
builds
exhorts the
include
judges not to be
close
intimate
quarter
or held
weapons
into a
such
decised
as
decision,
shotguns
and threatens the
and
opposite party with
arc
punishment for
horns.
endeavoring to corrupt the
So we
judges.
highly recommend you
1
grab
minus 2
yourself
minus
a
3 minus 4
legendary
minus
pilot
5
when
minus
you
6
start
minus 7 minus August 9th 10 minus November 12th 13 minus 14 minus 15 minus 16 minus 17 minus 18. 1 that which was above all things to be desired, O judges, and which above all things was calculated to have the greatest influence towards allaying the unpopularity of your order, and putting an end to the discredit into which your judicial decisions have fallen, appears
me
to have
out
been
of
thrown in
here,
your
I
way,
got this
and given to you not by any human contrivance, but almost by the imposition of the gods, at a most important crisis of the Republic. For an opinion has now become established, pernicious to us, and pernicious to the Republic, which has been the common talk of every one, not only at Rome, but among foreign nations also, that in the courts of law as they exist at present, no wealthy man, however guilty he may be, can possibly be convicted. Superscript 2 now at this time apparent to your order and to your tribunals, when men are ready to attempt by means, and by the proposal of new laws, to increase the existing unpopularity of the Senate, Caius Verus is brought to trial as a criminal, a man condemned in the opinion of everyone by his life and actions, but acquitted by the enormousness of his wealth according to his own hope and boast. I, O judges, have undertaken this cause as prosecutor with the greatest good wishes and expectation on the part of the Roman people, not in order to increase the unpopularity of the Senate, but to relieve it from the discredit which I share with it. For I have brought before you a man, by acting justly in whose case you have an opportunity of retrieving the lost credit of your judicial proceedings, of regaining your credit with the Roman people, and of giving satisfaction to foreign nations. A man, the embezzler of the public funds, the petty tyrant of Asia and Pamphylia, the robber who deprived the city of its rights, the disgrace and ruin of the province of Sicily. Superscript 3 and if you come to a decision about this man with severity and a due regard to your oaths, that authority which ought to remain in you will cling to you still. But if that man's vast riches shall break down the sanctity and honesty of the courts of justice, at least I shall achieve this, that it shall be plain that it was rather honest judgment that was wanting to the Republic, than a criminal to the judges, or an accuser to the criminal. To I, indeed, that I may confess to you the truth about myself, O judges, though many snares were laid for me by Caius Verus, both by land and sea, which I partly avoided by my own vigilance, and partly warded off by the zeal and kindness of my friends, yet I never seemed to be incurred in so much danger, and I never was in such a state of great apprehension, as I am now in this very court of law. For nor does the expectation which people have formed of my conduct of this prosecution, nor this concourse of so vast a multitude as is here assembled, influence me, though indeed I am greatly agitated by these circumstances so much as his nefarious plots which he is endeavoring to lay at one and the same time against me, against you, against Marcus Gabriel the praetor, and against the allies, against foreign nations, against the Senate, and even against the very name of senator. Whose favorite saying it is that they have got to fear who have stolen only as much as is enough for themselves, but that he has stolen so much that it may easily be plenty for many.
Against the wall.
That nothing is so holy that it cannot be corrupted, or so strongly fortified that it cannot be stormed by men.
Up like this.
But if he were as
People
secret in
won't
acting as he is audacious in attempting, perhaps
think
in some
we're just
particular he might
ignoring
sometime or other have escaped our
notice.
notice. But it happens very fortunately that to his incredible audacity there is joined a most unexampled folly. For as he was unconcealed in committing his robberies of money, so in his hope of corrupting the judges he has made his intentions and endeavors visible to every one. He says that once only in his life has he felt fear, at the time when he was first impeached as a criminal by me. Because he was only lately arrived from his province, and was branded with unpopularity and infamy, not modern but ancient and of long standing. And, besides that, the time was unlucky, being very ill-suited for corrupting the judges. 6 Therefore, when I had demanded a very short time to prosecute my inquiries in Sicily, he found a man to ask for 2 days less to make investigations in Achaia. 1, not with any real intention of doing the same with his diligence and industry, that I have accomplished by my labor, and daily and nightly investigations. For the Achaean inquisitor never even arrived at Brundusium. I in 50 days so traveled over the whole of Sicily that I examined into the records and injuries of all the tribes and of all private individuals, so that it was easily visible to everyone, that he had been seeking out a man not really for the purpose of bringing a defendant whom he accused to trial, but merely to occupy the time which ought to belong to me. 3-7 Now that most audacious and most senseless man thinks this. He is aware that I am come into court so thoroughly prepared and armed, that I shall fix all his thefts and crimes not only in your ears, but in the very eyes of all men. He sees that many senators are witnesses of his audacity. He sees that many Roman knights are so too, and many citizens, and many of the allies besides to whom he has done unmistakable injuries. He sees also that very numerous and very important deputations have come here at the same time from most friendly cities, armed with the public authority and evidence collected by their states. 8. And though this is the case, still he thinks so of all virtuous men. To such an extent does he believe the decisions of the senators to be corrupt and profligate, that he makes a custom of openly boasting that it was not without reason that he was greedy of money, since he now finds that there is such protection in money, and that he has bought what was the hardest thing of all the very time of his trial, in order to be able to buy everything else more easily. So that, as he could not by any possibility shirk the force of the accusations altogether, he might avoid the most violent gusts of the storm. 9. But if he had placed any hope at all, not only in his cause, but in any honorable defense, or in the eloquence or in the influence of anyone, he would not be so eager in collecting and catching at all these things. He would not scorn and despise the senatorial body to such a degree, as to procure a man to be selected out of the Senate at his will to be made a criminal of, who should plead his cause too, before him, while he in the meantime was preparing whatever he had need of. 10. And what the circumstances are on which he founds his hopes, and what hopes he builds on them, and what he is fixing his mind on. I see clearly. But how he can have the confidence to think that he can effect anything with the present praetor, and the present bench of judges, I cannot conceive. This one thing I know, which the Roman people perceived too when he rejected the judges, that his hopes were of that nature that he placed all his expectations of safety in his money. And that if this protection were taken from him, he thought nothing would be any help to him. For in his truth, what genius is there so powerful, what faculty of speaking, what eloquence so mighty, as to be in any particular able to defend the life of that man, convicted as it is of so many vices and crimes, and long since condemned by the inclinations and private sentiments of everyone. 11. And, to say nothing of the stains and disgraces of his youth, what other remarkable event is there in his quaestorship, that first step to honor, except that Gnaeus Carbo was robbed by his quaestor of the public money? That the consul was plundered and betrayed? His army deserted? His province abandoned? The holy nature and obligations imposed on him by lot violated? Whose lieutenancy was the ruin of all Asia and Pamphylia, in which provinces he plundered many houses, very many cities, all the shrines and temples. When he renewed and repeated against Gnaeus Dolabella his ancient wicked tricks when he had been quaestor, and did not only in his dangered desert, but even attack and betray the man to whom he had been lieutenant, and proquaestor, 5, and whom he had brought into odium by his crimes. 2. Whose only praetorship was the destruction of the sacred temples and the public works, and, as to his legal decisions, was the adjudging and awarding of property contrary to all established rules and precedents. But now he has established great and numerous monuments and proofs of all his vices in the province of Sicily, which he for 3 years so harassed and ruined that it can by no possibility be restored to its former condition, and appears scarcely able to be at all recovered after a long series of years, and a long succession of virtuous praetors. 13. While this man was praetor, the Sicilians enjoyed neither their own laws, nor the decrees of our Senate, nor the common rights of every nation. Everyone in Sicily has only so much left as either escaped the notice or was disregarded by the satiety of that most avaricious and licentious man. 5. No legal decision for 3 years was given on any other ground but his will. No property was so secure to any man, even if it had descended to him from his father and grandfather, but he was deprived of it at his command. Enormous sums of money were exacted from the property of the cultivators of the soil by a new and nefarious system. The most faithful of the allies were classed in the number of enemies. Roman citizens were tortured and put to death like slaves. The greatest criminals were acquitted in the courts of justice through bribery. The most upright and honorable men, being prosecuted while absent, were condemned and banished without being heard in their own defense. The most fortified harbors, the greatest and strongest cities, were laid open to pirates and robbers. 6. The sailors and soldiers of the Sicilians, our own allies and friends, died of hunger. The best built fleets on the most important stations were lost and destroyed, to the great disgrace of the Roman people. 14. The same man while praetor plundered and stripped those most ancient monuments, some erected by wealthy monarchs and intended by them as ornaments for their cities. Some, too, the work of our own generals, which they either gave or restored as conquerors to the different states in Sicily. And he did this not only in the case of public statues and ornaments, but he also plundered all the temples consecrated in the deep religious feelings of the people. He did not leave, in short, one god to the Sicilians which appeared to him to be made in a tolerably workmanlike manner, and with any of the skill of the ancients. I am prevented by actual shame from speaking of his nefarious licentiousness as shown in rapes and other such enormities. And I am unwilling also to increase the distress of those men who have been unable to preserve their children and their wives unpolluted by his wanton lust. 15. But, you will say, these things were done by him in such a manner as not to be notorious to all men. I think there is no man who has heard his name who cannot also relate wicked actions of his. So that I ought rather to be afraid of being thought to omit many of his crimes, than to invent any charges against him. And indeed I do not think that this multitude which has collected to listen to me wishes so much to learn of me what the facts of the case are, as to go over it with me, refreshing its recollection of what it knows already. 6. And as this is the case, that senseless and profligate man attempts to combat me in another manner. He does not seek to oppose the eloquence of anyone also to me. He does not rely on the popularity, or influence, or authority of anyone. He pretends that he trusts to these things. But I see what he is really aiming at. And indeed he is not acting with any concealment. He sets before me empty titles of nobility, that is to say the names of arrogant men, who do not hinder me so much by being noble, as assist me by being notorious. He pretends to rely on their protection, when he has in reality been contriving something else this long time. 16. What hope he now has, and what he is endeavoring to do, I will now briefly explain to you, O judges. But first of all, remark, I beg you, how the matter has been arranged by him from the beginning. When he first returned from the province, he endeavored to get rid of this prosecution by corrupting the judges at a great expense. And this object he continued to keep in view till the conclusion of the appointment of the judges. After the judges were appointed, equas in drawing lots for them, the fortune of the Roman people had defeated his hopes, and because in rejecting some, my diligence had defeated his impudence, his whole attempt at bribery was abandoned. 17. The affair was going on admirably. Lists of your names and of the whole tribunal were in everyone's hands. It did not seem possible to mark with both 7 of these men with any distinguishing mark or color or spot of dirt. And that fellow, from having been brisk and in high spirits, became on the sudden so downcast and humbled, that he seemed to be condemned not only by the Roman people but even by himself. But lo, all of a sudden, within these few days, since the consular comitia 8 had taken place, he has gone back to his original plan with more money, and the same plots are now laid against your reputation and against the fortunes of everyone, by the instrumentality of the same people. Which fact at first, O judges, was pointed out to me by a very slight hint and indication. But afterwards, when my suspicions were once aroused, I arrived at the knowledge of all the most secret counsels of that party without any mistake. 7:18 Whereas Hortensius the consul-elect was being attended home again from the campus by a great concourse and multitude of people, Caius Curio fell in with a multitude by chance, man whom I wish to name by way of honor rather than of disparagement. I will tell you what, if he had been unwilling to have it mentioned, he would not have spoken up in so large an assembly so openly and undisguisedly. Which, however, shall be mentioned by me deliberately and cautiously, that it may be seen that I pay due regard to our friendship and to his dignity. 19 He sees Verus in the crowd by the arch of Fabius. 9 He speaks to the man, and with a loud voice congratulates him on his victory. He does not say a word to Hortensius himself, who had been made consul, or to his friends and relations who were present attending on him. But he stops to speak to this man, embraces him, and bids him cast off all anxiety. I give you notice, said he, that you have been acquitted by this day's comitia. And as many most honorable men heard this, it is immediately reported to me. Indeed, everyone who saw me mentioned it to me the first thing. To some it appeared scandalous, to others ridiculous. Ridiculous to those who thought that this cause depended on the credibility of the witnesses, on the importance of the charges, and on the power of the judges, and not on the consular comitia. Scandalous to those who looked deeper, and who thought that this congratulation had reference to the corruption of the judge. 20 inches true. They argued in this manner, ye most honorable men spoke to one another, and to me in this manner there were now manifestly and undeniably no courts of justice at all. The very criminal who the day before thought that he was already condemned, is acquitted now that his defender has been made consul. What are we to think then? Will it avail nothing that all Sicily, all the Sicilians, that all the merchants who have business in that country, that all public and private documents are now at Rome? Nothing, if the consul-elect wills it otherwise. What? Will not the judges be influenced by the accusation, by the evidence, by the universal opinion of the Roman people? No. Everything will be governed by the power and authority of one man. 8 I will speak the truth, O judges. This thing agitated me greatly. For every good man was speaking in this way, that fellow will be taken out of your hands. But we shall not preserve our judicial authority much longer. For who, when Verus is acquitted, will be able to make any objection to transferring it from us? 21 It was a grievous thing to everyone, and the sudden elation of the profligate man did not weigh with them as much as the fresh congratulation of a very honorable one. I wish to dissemble my own vexation at it. I wish to conceal my own grief of mine under a cheerful countenance, and to bury it in silence. But lo, on the very days when the praetors elected were dividing their duties by lot, and when it fell to the share of Marcus Metellus to hold trials concerning extortion, information is given me that that fellow was receiving such congratulations, that he also sent men home to announce it to his wife. 22 And this too in truth displeased me. And yet I was not quite aware what I had so much to fear from this allotment of the praetors' duties. But I ascertained this one thing from trustworthy men from whom I received all my intelligence. That many chests full of Sicilian money had been sent by some senator to a Roman knight, and that of these about 10 chests had been left at that senator's house, with the statement that they were left to be used in comitia when I expected to be elected aedile, and that men to distribute this money among all the tribes had been summoned to attend him by night. 23 Of whom one, who thought himself under the greatest obligations to me, came to me that same night. Reported to me the speech which that fellow had addressed to them. That he had reminded them how liberally he had treated them formerly when he was candidate for the praetorship, and at the last consular and praetorian comitia. And in the second place that he had promised them immediately whatever money they required, if they could procure my rejection from the aedileship. That on this some of them said that they did not dare attempt it. That others answered that they did not think it could be managed. But that one bold friend was found, a man of the same family as himself, Quintus Verus, of the Romilian tribe, of the most perfect school of bribers, the pupil and friend of Verus' father, who promised that, if 500,000 sesterces were provided, he would manage it. And that there were some others who said that they would cooperate with him. And as this was the case, he warned me beforehand with a friendly disposition, to take great care. 9:24 I was disquieted about many most important matters at one and the same moment, and with very little time to deliberate, the comitia were at hand. And at them I was to be opposed at immense expenditure of money. This trial was at hand. The Sicilian treasurers maced that matter also. I was afraid, from apprehension about the comitia, to conduct the matters relating to the trial with freedom. And because of the trial, I was unable to attend with all my heart to my candidates. Threatening the agents of bribery was out of the question, because I saw that they were aware that I was hampered and fettered by this trial. 25 And at the same moment I hear that notice has been given to the Sicilians by Hortensius to come to speak to him at his house. That the Sicilians behaved in that matter with a proper sense of their own liberty, and, when they understood on what account they were sent for, they would not go. In the meantime my comitia began to be held, of which that fellow thought himself the master, as he had been of all the other comitia this year. He began to run about, that influential man, with his son, a youth of engaging and popular manners, among the tribes. The son began to address and to call on all the friends of his father, that is to say, all his agents for bribery. And when this was noticed and perceived, the Roman people took care with the most earnest goodwill that I should not be deprived of my honor through the money of that man, whose riches had not been able to make me violate my good faith. 26 After that I was released from the great anxiety about my canvass, I began, with a mind much more unoccupied and much more at ease, to think of nothing and to do nothing except what related to this trial. I find, O judges, these plans formed and begun to be put in execution by them to protract the matter, whatever steps it might be necessary to take in order to do so that the cause might be pleaded before Marcus Metellus as praetor. That by doing so they would have these advantages. Firstly, that Marcus Metellus was most friendly to them. Secondly, that not only would Hortensius be consul, but Quintus Metellus also, and listen while I show you how great a friend he is to them. For he gave him a token of his goodwill of such a sort, that he seemed to be giving it as a return for the suffrages 10 of the tribes which he had scoured to him. 27. Did you think that I would say nothing of such serious matters as these? And that, at a crisis of such danger to the Republic and my own character, I would consult anything rather than my duty and my dignity?
No hard feels.
The other consul-elect sent for the Sicilians. Some came, because Lucius Metellus was praetor in Sicily. To them he speaks in this manner, that he is the consul. That one of his brothers has Sicily for his province. That the other is to be judge in all prosecutions for extortion. And that care has been taken in many ways that there should be no possibility of Verus being injured. 1028 I ask you, Metellus, what is corrupting the course of justice, if this is not, O seek to frighten witnesses, and especially Sicilians, timid and oppressed men, not only by your own private influence, but by the fear of the consul, and by the power of two praetors. What would you do for an innocent man or for a relation, when for the sake of the most guilty man, entirely unconnected with you, you depart from your duty and your dignity, and allow what he is constantly saying to appear true to anyone who is not acquainted with you? 29 For they said that Verus said, that you had not been made consul by destiny, as the rest of your family had been, but by his assistance. 2 consuls, therefore, and the judge are to be such because of his will. We shall not only, says he, avoid having a man too scrupulous in investigating, too subservient to the opinion of the people, Marcus Glario, but we shall have this advantage also, Arcus Caesarius is the judge, the colleague of our accuser, a man of tried and proved experience in the decision of actions. It will never do for us to have such a man as that on the bench, which we are endeavoring to corrupt by some means or other. For before, when he was one of the judges on the tribunal of which Junius 11 was president, he was not only very indignant at that shameful transaction, but he even betrayed and denounced it. After the 1st of January we shall not have this man for our judge. 0 We shall not have Quintus Manlius and Quintus Fornificius, 2 most severe and upright judges, for judges, because they will then be tribunes of the people. Publius Sulpicius, a solemn and upright judge, must enter on his magistracy on the 5th of November. Marcus Preferius, of the renowned equestrian family and of that incorruptible character. Lucius Cassius, of a family renowned for its severity in all things, and especially as judges. Gnaeus Trinodus, a man of the greatest scrupulousness and diligence. These 3 men of ancient strictness of principle are all military tribunes elect. After the 1st of January they will not be able to act as judges. And besides this, we elect Bilotta successor in the room of Marcus Metellus, since he is to preside over this very trial. And so after the 1st of January, the praetor, and almost the whole bench of judges being changed, we shall elude the terrible threats of the prosecutor, and the great expectations entertained of this trial, and manage it according to our own will and pleasure.
I'm sorry.
One today is the 5th of August.
I'm in a battle, Barry. You want to join me?
This day they do not even count. There are 10 days between this and the votive games which Knaus Pompus is going to celebrate. These games will take
How come
up 15
they got
days.
one more robot
Then
than
immediately
us?
the Roman games will
That's
follow.
not fair.
And so, when nearly 40 days have
somebody
intervened,
died.
then at length they think they shall have to answer what has been said by us. And they think that, what with speeches, and what with excuses, they will easily be able to protract the cause till the period of the games of victory. With these the plebeian games are connected, after which there will be either no day at all, or very few for pleading in. And so, when the accusation has got stale and old, the matter will come all fresh before Marcus Metellus as praetor. And if I had distrusted his good faith, I should not have retained him as a judge.
There you
32
go.
But now I have such an opinion of him, that I would rather this matter was brought to a close while he is judge than while he is praetor. And I would rather entrust to him his own tablet while he is on his oath, than the tablets of others when he is restrained by no such obligation. 11 Now, O judges, I consult you as to what you think I ought to do. For you will, in truth, without speaking, give me that advice which I understand that I must inevitably adopt. If I occupy the time which I legitimately might in speaking, I shall reap the fruit of my labor, industry, and diligence. And by this prosecution I shall make it manifest that no one in the memory of man appears ever to have come before a court of justice better prepared, more vigilant, or with his cause better got up. But while I am getting this credit for my industry, there is great danger lest the criminal may escape. What, then, is there which can be done? I think it is neither obscure nor hidden. 33 I will reserve for another time that fruit of praise which may be derived from a long uninterrupted speech. At present I must support this accusation by documentary evidence, by witnesses, by letters of private individuals and of public bodies, and by various other kinds of proof. The whole of this contest is between you and me, O Hortensius. I will
Hold
speak
on, let me
openly.
just win this battle,
If I thought that you were contending with me in the matter of speaking, and of getting rid of the charges I bring against your client in this cause,
Why don't you come
I,
watch it
too,
with me,
would devote
dear,
much
see if
pains
I
now to
win
your
and get a
elaborate
new
accusation,
team.
and to dilating on
Try
my
my
charges.
best.
Now, since you have determined to contend against me with artifice, not so much in obedience to the promptings of your own nature, as from consulting his occasions and his
door.
cause,
There
it is
you
necessary
go.
for me to oppose conduct of
Thank
that
you,
sort
sir.
of purpose.
Critical
34 Your plan
damage.
is to begin to answer me after 2 sets of games have been celebrated. Mine is to have the adjournment 12
Oh, ouch.
before the first series.
I don't like that
And
thermal
it is believed
lance.
That the plan of yours will be thought
Point that at
crafty,
somebody
but
else.
this determination of mine is
Okay,
necessary.
here you go.
12 But as for what I had begun to say, namely, that the contest is
Oh.
between you and me, this is it. When I had undertaken this cause at the request of the Sicilians, and had thought it a very honorable and glorious thing for me that they were willing to make experiment of my integrity and diligence, you already knew by experience my
That's
innocence
it,
and
run.
temper. Then, when I had undertaken this business, I proposed to myself some greater action also by which the Roman people should be able to see my goodwill towards the Republic.
Got it.
35 for that seemed to me to be by no means worthy of my industry and efforts. For that man to be brought to trial by me who had been already condemned by the judgment of all men, unless that intolerable influence of yours, and the grasping nature which you have displayed for some years in many trials, was interposed also in the case of the desperate man.
It's time for
But
bed.
no, since all this dominion and sovereignty of yours over the courts of justice delights you so much, and since there are some men who are neither ashamed of their licentiousness and their infamy, nor weary of it, and who, as if on purpose, seem to wish to encounter hatred and unpopularity from the Roman people, I confess that I have undertaken this great burden perhaps, and one dangerous to myself, but still worthy of my applying myself to it with all the vigor of my age, and all diligence. 36 And since the whole order of the Senate is weighed down by the discredit brought on it by the wickedness and audacity of a few, and is overwhelmed by the infamy of the tribunals, I confess myself an enemy to this race of men, an accuser worthy of their hatred, a persevering, a bitter adversary. I arrogate this to myself, I claim this for myself, and I will carry out this enmity in my magistracy, and from that post in which the Roman people has willed that from the next 1st of January I shall act in concert with it in matters concerning the Republic, and concerning wicked men, I promise the Roman people that this shall be the most honorable and the fairest employment of my aedileship. I warn, I forewarn, I give notice beforehand to those men who are wont either to put money down, to undertake for others, to receive money, or to promise money, or to act as agents in bribery, or as go-betweens in corrupting the seat of judgment, and who have promised their influence or their impudence in aid of such a business, in this trial to keep their hands and inclinations from this nefarious wickedness. 1337 Hortensius will then be consul with the chief command and authority, but I shall be that is, I shall be a little more than a private individual. And yet this business, which I promise that I am going to advocate, is of such a nature, so pleasing and agreeable to the Roman people, that the consul himself will appear in this cause, if that be possible, even less than a private individual in comparison of me. All those things shall not only be mentioned, but even, where certain matters have been explained, shall be fully discussed, which for the last 10 years, ever since the office of the judge has been transferred to the Senate, has been nefariously and wickedly done in the decision of judicial matters. 38 The Roman people shall know from me why it is that when the equestrian body supplied the judges for nearly 50 years together, not even the slightest suspicion ever arose of bribes having been accepted for the purpose of influencing a decision. Why it is, I say, when the judicial authority was transferred to the senatorial body, and the power 13 of the Roman people over every one of us was taken away, Quintus Callidius, when he was condemned, said that a man of praetorian rank could not honestly be condemned at a less price than 300,000 sesterces. Why it is that when Publius Septimius, a senator, was condemned for extortion, when Quintus Hortensius was praetor, damages were assessed against him, including money which he had received as judge to decide causes which came before him. 39 Why it is, that in the case of Caius Herennius, and in that of Caius Papilius, senators, both of whom were convicted of peculation why it is, that in the case of Marcus Atilius, who was convicted of treason was made plain, that they had all received money for the purpose of influencing their judicial decisions. Why it is, that senators have been found who, when Caius Verus, as praetor of the city, gave out the lots, voted against the criminal whom they were condemning without having inquired into his case. Why it is, that a senator was found who, when he was judged, took money in one and the same trial both from the defendant to distribute among the judges, and from the accuser to condemn the defendant. 40 But how shall I adequately complain of that state, that disgrace, that calamity of the whole senatorial order? Hath this thing actually happened in the city while the senatorial order furnished the judges, that the votes of men on the rows were marked by colored tablets? I pledge myself that I will urge all these things with diligence and with strictness. 14 And what do you suppose will be my thoughts, if I find in this very trial any violation of the laws committed in any similar manner? Especially when I can prove by many witnesses that Caius Verus often said in Sicily, in the hearing of many persons, that he had a powerful friend, in confidence in whom he was plundering the province. And that he was not seeking money for himself alone, but that he had so distributed the 3 years of his Sicilian praetorship, that he should say he did exceedingly well, if he appropriated the gains of 1 year to the augmentation of his own property, those of the 2nd year to his patrons and defenders, and reserved the whole of the 3rd year, the most productive and gainful of all, for the judges. 41 From which it came into my mind to say that which, when I had said lately before Marcus Glabrio at the time of striking the list of judges, I perceived the Roman people greatly moved by. That I thought that foreign nations would send ambassadors to the Roman people to procure the abrogation of the law, and of all trials, about extortion. For if there were no trials, they think that each man would only plunder them of as much as he would think sufficient for himself and his children. But now, because there are trials of that sort, everyone carries off as much as it will take to satisfy himself, his patrons, his advocates, the praetor, and the judges. And that this is an enormous sum. That they may be able to satisfy the cupidity of one most avaricious man, but are quite unable to incur the expense of his most guilty victory over the laws. 42 O trials worthy of being recorded. O splendid reputation of our order. When the allies of the Roman people are unwilling that trials for extortion should take place, which were instituted by our ancestors for the sake of the allies. Would that man ever have had a favorable hope of his own safety, if he had not conceived in his mind a bad opinion of you? On which account, he ought, if possible, to be still more hated by you than he is by the Roman people, because he considers you like himself in avarice and wickedness and perjury. 1543 And I beg you, in the name of the immortal gods, O judges, think of and guard against this. I warn you, I give notice to you, of what I am well assured, that this most seasonable opportunity has been given to you by the favor of the gods, for the purpose of delivering your whole order from hatred, from unpopularity, from infamy, and from disgrace. There is no severity believed to exist till the tribunals, nor any scruples with regard to religion. In short, there are not believed to be any tribunals at all. Therefore we are despised and scorned by the Roman people. We are branded with a heavy and now a long-standing infamy. 44 Nor, in fact, is there any other reason for which the Roman people has with so much earnestness sought the restoration of the tribunician power, but when it was demanding that in words, it seemed to be asking for that, but in reality it was asking for tribunes which it could trust. And this did not escape the notice of Quintus Catullus, a most sagacious and honorable man, who, when Cnaeus Pompus, a most gallant and illustrious man, made a motion about the tribunician power, and when he was asked his opinion, began his speech in this manner, speaking with the greatest authority, that the conscript fathers presided over the courts of justice badly and wickedly. But if in deciding judicial trials they had been willing to satisfy the expectations of the Roman people, men would not so greatly regret the tribunician power? 45 Lastly, when Cnaeus Pompus himself, when first he delivered an address to the people as consul-elect, mentioned what seemed above all things to be watched for that he would restore the power of the tribunes, a great shout was raised at his words, and a grateful murmur pervaded the assembly. And when he had said also in the same assembly that the provinces were depopulated and tyrannized over, that the courts of justice were become base and wicked, and that he desired to provide for it to remedy that evil, the Roman people then signified their goodwill, not with a shout, but with a universal uproar. 1646 But now men are on the watchtowers. They observe how every one of you behaves himself in respecting religion and in preserving the laws. They see that, ever since the passing of the law for restoring the power of the tribunes, only one senator, and he too a very insignificant one, 14, has been condemned. And though they do nor blame this, yet they have nothing which they can very much commend. For there is no credit in being upright in a case where there is no one who is either able or who endeavors to corrupt one. 47 This is a trial in which you will be deciding about the defendant, the Roman people about you. Why the example of what happens to this man it will be determined whether, when senators are the judges, a very guilty and a very rich man can be condemned. Moreover, he is a criminal of such a sort, that there is absolutely nothing whatever in him except the greatest crimes, and excessive riches. So that if he be acquitted, no other opinion can be formed of the matter except that which is the most discreditable possible. Such numerous and enormous vices as his will not be considered to have been cancelled by influence, by family connection, by some things which may have been done well, or even by the minor vices of flattery and subservience. 48 inches short, I will conduct the cause in this manner. I will bring forward things of such a sort, so well known, so proved by evidence, so important, and so undeniable, that no one shall venture to use his influence to obtain from you the acquittal of that man. For I will show a path and method by which I can investigate and become acquainted with all their endeavors. The matter will be so managed by me that not only the ears but even the eyes of the Roman people shall seem to be present at all their councils. 49 You have in your power to remove and to eradicate the disgrace and infamy which has now for many years attached to your order. It is evident to all men, that since these tribunals have been established which we now have, there has never been a bench of judges of the same splendor and dignity as this. 15 If anything is done wrongly in this case, all men will think not that other more capable judges should be appointed of the same order of men, which is not possible. But that another order must be sought for, from which to select the judges for the future. 1750 On which account, in the first place, I beg this of the immortal gods, which I seem to myself to have hopes of too, that in this trial no one may be found to be wicked except him who has long since been found to be such. Secondly, if there are many wicked men, I promise this to you, O judges, I promise this to the Roman people, that my life shall fail rather than my vigor and perseverance in prosecuting their iniquity. 51 But that iniquity, which, if it should be committed, I promise to prosecute severely, with however much trouble and danger to myself, and whatever enmities I may bring on myself by so doing, you, O Marcus Glabrido, can guard against ever taking place by your wisdom, and authority, and diligence. Do you undertake the cause of the tribunals? Do you undertake the cause of impartiality, of integrity, of good faith and of religion? Do you undertake the cause of the Senate? That, being proved worthy by its conduct in this trial, it may come into favor and popularity with the Roman people. Think who you are, and in what a situation you are placed. What you ought to give to the Roman people, what you ought to repay to your ancestors. Let the recollection of the Autelian 16 law passed by your father occur to your mind, owing to which law the Roman people has had this advantage of most admirable decisions and very strict judges in cases of extortion. 52 High authorities surround you which will not suffer you to forget your family credit. Which will remind you day and night that your father was a most brave man, your grandfather a most wise one, and your father-in-law a most worthy man. Wherefore, if you have inherited the vigor and energy of your father Glabrido in resisting audacious men, if you have inherited the prudence of your grandfather Scaevola in foreseeing intrigues which are prepared against your fame and that of your fellow judges, if you have any share of the constancy of your father-in-law Scaurus, so that no one can move you from your genuine and deliberate opinion, the Roman people will understand that with an upright and honorable praetor, and a carefully selected bench of judges, abundance of wealth has more influence in bringing a criminal into suspicion, than in contributing to his safety. 1853 I am resolved not to permit the praetor or the judges to be changed in this cause. I will not permit the matter to be delayed till the lictors of the consuls can go and summon the Sicilians, whom the servants of the consuls elect did not influence before, when by an unprecedented course of proceeding they sent for them all. I will not permit those miserable men, formerly the allies and friends of the Roman people, now their slaves and suppliants, to lose not only their rights and fortunes by their tyranny, but to be deprived of even the power of bewailing their condition. 54 I will not, I say, when the cause has been summed up by me, permit them after a delay of 40 days has intervened, then at last to reply to me when my accusation has already fallen into oblivion through lapse of time. I will not permit the decision to be given when this crowd collected from all Italy has departed from Rome, which has assembled from all quarters at the same time on account of the comitia, of the games, and of the census. The reward of the credit gained by your decision, or the danger arising from the unpopularity which will accrue to you if you decide unjustly, I think ought to belong to you. The labor and anxiety to me. The knowledge of what is done and the recollection of what has been said by every one, to all. 55 I will adopt this course, not an unprecedented one, but one that has been adopted before, by those who are now the chief men of our state, a course, I mean, of at once producing the witnesses. What you will find novel, O judges, is this, that I will so marshal my witnesses as to unfold the whole of my accusation. That when I have established it by examining my witnesses, by arguments, and by my speech, then I shall show the agreement of the evidence with my accusation, so that there shall be no difference between the established mode of prosecuting, and this new one, except that, according to the established mode, when everything has been said which is to be said, then the witnesses are produced. Here they shall be produced as each count is brought forward, so that the other side shall have the same opportunity of examining them, of arguing and making speeches, or of attacking their evidence. If there be anyone who prefers an uninterrupted speech and the old mode of conducting a prosecution without any break, he shall have it in some other trial. But for this time let him understand that what we do is done by us on compulsion, for we only do it with the design of opposing the artifice of the opposite party by our prudence. 56. This will be the first part of the prosecution. We say that Caius Verus has not only done many licentious acts, many cruel ones, towards Roman citizens, and towards some of the allies, many wicked acts against both gods and men, but especially that he has taken away 40 million sesterces 17 out of Sicily contrary to the laws. We will make this so plain to you by witnesses, by private documents, and by public records that you shall decide that, even if we had abundant space and leisure days for making a long speech without any inconvenience, still there was no need at all of a long speech in this matter. Footnotes. It is not certainly known what Cicero refers to here. This refers to the same subject as the previous note. In any given case the litigant parties agreed upon a judex, or accepted him whom the magistrates proposed. A party had the power of rejecting a proposed judex, though there must have been some limit to this power. Sic. Procluent. 43. Smith, Dict. And v. Judex. What the limits to this power were, or under what restrictions it was exercised, we do not now know, because the provinces which involved all these obligations were distributed by lot to the different magistrates. The proconsul or praetor who had the administration of a province was attended by a quaestor. This quaestor had undoubtedly to perform the same offices as those who accompanied the armies into the field. They had also to levy those parts of the public revenue which were not harmed by the public honey. In the provinces they had the same jurisdiction as the curule aediles at Rome. The relation existing between a praetor or proconsul and his quaestor was according to ancient custom regarded as resembling that between a father and his son. When a quaestor died in his province, the praetor had the right to appoint a proquaestor in his stead. Smith, Dict. And pages 814, b. Quaestor. The coast of Sicily being much infested by pirates, it was the custom of the praetors to fit out a fleet every year for the protection of trade. This fleet was provided by a contribution of the maritime towns, each of which usually furnished a ship, properly appointed with men and provisions. But bearers, for a sufficient bribe, often excused them from providing the ship, and always discharged as many men as were willing to pay for it. On one occasion a fleet was faded out, and a command of it given, not to any Roman officer, but to Cleomenes, a Syracusan, who being both incapable, and also short of hands from the proceedings of bearers, was attacked in the port of Pulcinus, 2 of his ships taken, and the rest burnt, after which the pirates sailed into the port of Syracuse, and returned back in safety. But Verus compelled all the captains of Cleomenes' fleet to sign a document testifying that this disaster had not happened through any deficiency in the equipment of their ships, which were fully provided with everything necessary, and then he put them to death. This refers to the way in which Hortensius had once marked the judges whom he had bribed, as is mentioned in the speech against Caecilius. The Comitia Centuriata for the election of consuls for the succeeding year were held on the 26th of July. This arch had been erected to commemorate the victory obtained by Fabius over the Alaubriges. And it was erected in the Via Sacra, as Cicero mentions in his speech Pro Plancium. The order in which the centuries voted was decided by lot, and that which gave its vote first was called Centuria Prerogativa. Nip, Dict. At pages 274, v. Comitia. We also find the plural prerogativae, because they were of 2 kinds, juniarum and seniarum. Idels Dict. In v. Prerogativa. Caesonius was now aedile elect with Cicero. In the prosecution instituted by Clunius against Oppianicus, while Verus was praetor urbanus, Oppianicus had tried to ensure his acquittal by bribing Stolenus, Gallus and Stretta, 3 of the judges. But Caesonius divulged the corrupt nature of their motives, procured the conviction of Oppianicus, and the subsequent impeachment and punishment of the judges who had been bribed. The Latin is ad comparendinem. Comprendiner is, when the cause has been pleaded on each side, to order that on the 3rd day both the defendant and the prosecutor appear to speak a second time. Ottoman. The parties appeared before the judex on the 3rd day comparending audio, unless the praetor had deferred the judicium for some sufficient reason. Nip, Dict. And pages 529. P. Judex. That is to say, when the power of appealing to the tribunes of the people was taken away. The senator was Dolabella. Cicero several times in these orations takes credit to himself for his industry and intrepidity in striking all judges liable to suspicion off the list of those who were to try this case. The Lex Acilia was carried by Marcus Acilius Glabrido, the father of this Glabrido, when tribune of the people. It abridged the proceedings in trials for extortion, and did not allow of the adjournment and delays which were permitted by previously existing laws. Sestertian, when used with a numeral adverb, stands for 100,000 sesterces. 400 times 100,000 equal 40 million.
affecting his conduct in the city readership. The following 5 orations were never spoken. They were published afterwards as they had been prepared and intended to be spoken if hers had made a regular defense.
Defense. Whereas this was the only cause in which Cicero had been engaged as accuser, he was willing to leave these orations as a specimen of his abilities that way, and as a pattern of a just and diligent impeachment of a corrupt magistrate. But Hortensius had been so confounded by the novelty of Cicero's mode of conducting the prosecution, and by the strength of the case brought against his client, that he was quite unable to make any defense, and Verres went into voluntary exile. In the beginning of this oration Cicero imagines Verres to be present, and to be prepared to make his defense, but before he proceeds to the main subjects of the prosecution, which occupy the last 4 orations, he devotes this one to an examination of his previous character and conduct as a public man, as Questor, as Legatus, as Praetor Urbanus, and as Praetor in Sicily. In order to show that his previous conduct had been such as to warrant anyone in believing the charges he was now bringing against him. 1. I think that no one of you, O judges, is ignorant that for these many days the discourse of the populace, and the opinion of the Roman people, has been that Caius Verres would not appear a second time before the bench to reply to my charges, and would not again present himself in court. And this idea had not thought about merely because he had deliberately determined and resolved not to appear, but because no one believed that anyone would be so audacious, so frantic, and so impudent, as, after having been convicted of such nefarious crimes, and by so many witnesses, to venture to present himself to the eyes of the judges, or to show his face to the Roman people. Superscript 2. But he is the same Verres that he always was. As he was abandoned enough to dare, so he is hardened enough to listen to anything. He is present. He replies to us. He makes his defense. He does not even leave himself this much of character, to be supposed, by being silent and keeping out of the way when he is so visibly convicted of the most infamous conduct, to have sought for a modest escape for his impudence. I can endure this, O judges, and I am not vexed that I am to receive the reward of my labors, and you the reward of your virtue. For if he had done what he had first determined to, that is, had not appeared, it would have been somewhat less known than is desirable for me what pains I had taken in preparing and arranging this prosecution, and your praise, O judges, would have been exceedingly slight and little heard of. Superscript 3. For this is not what the Roman people is expecting from you, nor what it can be contented with, namely, for a man to be condemned who refuses to appear, and for you to act with resolution in the case of a man whom nobody has dared to defend. Aye, let him appear, let him reply. Let him be defended with the utmost influence and the utmost zeal of the most powerful men. Let my diligence have to contend with the covetousness of all of them, your integrity with his riches, the consistency of the witnesses with the threats and power of his patrons. Then indeed those things will be seen to be overcome when they have come to the contest and to the struggle. But if he had been condemned in his absence, he would have appeared not so much to have consulted his own advantage as to have grudged you your credit. 2. For neither can there be any greater safety for the Republic imagined at this time, than for the Roman people to understand that, if all unworthy judges are carefully rejected by the accusers, the allies, the laws, and the Republic can be thoroughly defended by a bench of judges chosen from the senators. Nor can any such injury to the fortunes of all happen, as for all regard for truth, for integrity, for good faith, and for religion to be, in the opinion of the Roman people, cast aside by the senatorial body. 5. And therefore, I seem to myself, O judges, to have undertaken to uphold an important, and very failing, and almost neglected part of the Republic, and by so doing to be acting not more for the benefit of my own reputation than of yours. For I have come forward to diminish the unpopularity of the courts of justice, and to remove the reproaches which are leveled at them. In order that, when this cause has been decided according to the wish of the Roman people, the authority of the courts of justice may appear to have been re-established in some degree by my diligence. And in order that this matter may be so decided that an end may be put at length to the controversy about the tribunals. 6. And, indeed, beyond all question, O judges, that matter depends on your decision in this cause. For the criminal is most guilty. Oh, and if he be condemned, men will cease to say that money is all-powerful with the present tribunal. But if he be acquitted, we shall cease to be able to make any objection to transferring the tribunal to another body. Although that fellow has not in reality any hope, nor the Roman people any fear of his acquittal, there are some men who do marvel at his singular impudence in being present, in replying to the accusations brought against him. But to me even this does not appear marvelous in comparison with his other actions of audacity and madness. For he has done many impious and nefarious actions both against gods and men. By the punishment for which crimes he is now disquieted and driven out of his mind and out of his senses. 3. The punishments of Roman citizens are driving him mad, some of whom he has delivered to the executioner, others he has put to death in prison, others he has crucified while demanding their rights as freemen and as Roman citizens. The gods of his fathers are hurrying him away to punishment, because he alone has been found to lead to execution sons torn from the embraces of their fathers, and to demand of parents payment for leave to bury their sons. The reverence due to, and the holy ceremonies practiced in, every shrine and every temple that all violated by him. And the images of the gods, which have not only been taken away from their temples, but which are even lying in darkness, having been cast aside and thrown away by no not allow his mind to rest free from frenzy and madness. 8. Nor does he appear to me merely to offer himself to condemnation, nor to be content with the common punishment of avarice, when he has involved himself in so many atrocities. His savage and monstrous nature wishes for some extraordinary punishment. It is not alone demanded that, by his condemnation, their property may be restored to those from whom it has been taken away. But the insults offered to the religion of the immortal gods must be expiated, and the tortures of Roman citizens, and the blood of many innocent men, must be atoned for by that man's punishment. 9. For we have brought before your tribunal not only a thief, but a wholesale robber. Not only an adulterer, but a ravisher of chastity. Not only a sacrilegious man, but an open enemy to all sacred things and all religion. Not only an assassin, but a most barbarous murderer of both citizens and allies. So that I think him the only criminal in the memory of man so atrocious, that it is even for his own good to be condemned. For who is there who does not see this, that though he be acquitted, against the will of gods and men, yet that he cannot possibly be taken out of the hands of the Roman people? who does not see that it would be an excellent thing for us in that case, if the Roman people were content with the punishment of that one criminal alone, and did not decide that he had not committed any greater wickedness against them when he plundered temples, when he murdered so many innocent men, when he destroyed Roman citizens by execution, by torture, by the cross, and he released leaders of Banditi for bribes, Honde, who, when on their oaths, acquitted a man covered with so many, with such enormous, with such unspeakable wickednesses. 10. There is, O judges, no room for anyone to earn respect of this man. He is not such a criminal. This is not such a time. This is not such a tribunal. I fear to seem to say anything too arrogant before such men. Even the advocate is not such a man, that a criminal so guilty, so abandoned, so plainly convicted, can be either stealthily or openly snatched out of his hands with impunity. When such men as these are judges, shall I not be able to prove that Caius Verus has taken bribes contrary to the laws? Will such men venture to assert that they have not believed so many senators, so many Roman knights, so many cities, so many men of the highest honor from so illustrious a province, so many letters of home nation and of private individuals? That they have resisted so general a wish of the Roman people? 11. Let them venture. We will find, if we are able to bring that fellow alive before another tribunal, men to whom we can prove that he and his quaestorship embezzled the public money which was given to Cnaeus Carbo the consul. Men whom we can persuade that he got money under false pretenses from the quaestors of the city, as you have learned in my former pleadings. There will be some men, too, who will blame his boldness in having released some of the contractors from supplying the corn due to the public, when they could make it for his own interest. There will even, perhaps, be some men who will think that robbery of his most especially to be punished, when he did not hesitate to carry off out of the most holy temples and out of the cities of our allies and friends, the monuments of Marcus Marcellus and of Publius Africanus, which in name indeed belonged to them, but in reality both belonged and were always considered to belong to the Roman people. 512. Suppose he has escaped from the court without calculation. Let him think of the generals of the enemy, for whose release he has accepted bribes. Let him consider what answer he can make about those men whom he has left in his own house to substitute in their places. 1. Let him consider not only how he can get over our accusation, but also how he can remedy his own confession. Let him recollect that, in the former pleadings, being excited by the adverse and hostile shouts of the Roman people, he confessed that he had not caused the leaders of the pirates to be executed, and that he was afraid even then that it would be imputed to him that he had released them for money. Let him confess that, which cannot be denied, that he, as a private individual, kept the leaders of the pirates alive and under in his own house, after he had returned to Rome, as long as he could do so for me. If in the case of such a prosecution for treason it was lawful for him to do so, I will admit that it was proper. Suppose he escapes from this accusation also. I will proceed to that point to which the Roman people has long been inviting me. 13. For it thinks that the decision concerning the rights to freedom and to citizenship belong to itself. And it thinks rightly. Let that fellow, forsooth, break down with his evidence the intentions of the senators. Let him force his way through the questions of all men and him make his escape from your severity. Believe me, he will be held by much tighter chains in the hands of the Roman people. The Roman people will give credit to those Roman knights who, when they were produced as witnesses before you originally, said that a Roman citizen, one who was offering honorable men as his bail, was crucified by him in their sight. 14. The whole of the 35 tribes will believe a most honorable and accomplished man, Marcus Annius, who said, that when he was present, a Roman citizen perished by the hand of the executioner. That most admirable man Lucius Flavius, a Roman knight, will be listened to by the Roman people, who gave in evidence that his intimate friend Herennius, a merchant from Africa, though more than 100 Roman citizens at Syracuse knew him, and defended him in tears, was put to death by the executioner. Lucius Sudius, a man endowed with every accomplishment, speaks to them with an honesty and authority and conscientious veracity which they must trust. And he said on his oath before you that many Roman citizens had been most cruelly put to death, with every circumstance of violence, in his stone quarries. When I am conducting this cause for the sake of the Roman people from this rostrum, I have no fear that either any violence can be able to save him from the votes of the Roman people, or that any labor undertaken by me in my aedileship can be considered more honorable or more acceptable by the Roman people. 6:15 Let, therefore, every one at this trial attempt everything. There is no mistake now which anyone can make in this cause, O judges, which will not be made at your risk. My own line of conduct, as it is already known to you in what is past, is also provided for, and resolved on, in what is to come. I displayed my zeal for the Republic at that time, when, after a long interval, I reintroduced the old custom, and at the request of the allies and friends of the Roman people, who were, however, my own most intimate connections, prosecuted a most audacious man. And this action of mine most virtuous and accomplished men, in which number many of you were approved of to such a degree, that they refused the man who had been his quaestor, and who, having been offended by him, wished to prosecute his own quarrel against him, leave not only to prosecute the man himself, but even back the accusation against him, when he himself begged to do so. 16 I went into Sicily for the sake of inquiring into the business, in which occupation the salary of my return showed my industry. The multitude of documents and witnesses which I brought with me declared my diligence. And I further showed my moderation and scrupulousness, in that when I had arrived as a senator among the allies of the Roman people, having been quaestor in the province, I, though the defender of the common cause of them all, lodged rather with my own hereditary friends and connections, than those who had sought that assistance from me. My arrival was no trouble nor expense to anyone, either publicly or privately. I used in the inquiry just as much power as the law gave me, not as much as I might have had through the zeal of those men whom that fellow had pressed. 17 When I returned to Rome from Sicily, when he and his friends, luxurious and polite men, had disseminated reports of this sort, in order to blunt the inclinations of the witnesses, such as that I had been seduced by a great bribe from proceeding with a genuine prosecution. Although it did not seem probable to anyone, because the witnesses from Sicily were men who had known me as a quaestor in the province. And as the witnesses from Rome were men of the highest character, who knew every one of us thoroughly, just as they themselves are known. Still I had some apprehension lest anyone should have a doubt of my good faith and integrity, till we came to striking out the objectionable judges. 7. I knew that in selecting the judges, some men, even within my own recollection, had not avoided the suspicion of a good understanding with the opposite party, though their industry of diligence was being proved actually in the prosecution of them. 18. I objected to objectionable judges in such a way that this is plain. Since the Republic has had that constitution which we now enjoy, no tribunal has ever existed of similar renown and dignity. And this credit that fellow says that he shares in common with me. Since when he rejected Publius Galba as judge, he retained Marcus Lucretius. And when, upon this, his patron asked him why he had allowed his most intimate friends Sextus Pietrus, Quintus Constantius, and Quintus Junius to be objected to, he answered, because he knew them to be too much attached to their own ideas and opinions in coming to a decision. 19. And so when the business of objecting to the judges was over, I hope that you and I had now one common task before us. I thought that my good faith and diligence was approved of, not only by those to whom I was known, but even by strangers. And I was not mistaken, for in the commission for my election, when that man was employing boundless bribery against me, the Roman people decided that his money, which had no influence with me when put in opposition to my own good faith, ought to have no influence with them to rob me of my honor. On the day when you first, O judges, were summoned to this place, and sat in judgment on this criminal, who was so hostile to your order, who was so desirous of a new constitution, of a new tribunal and new judges, as not to be moved at the sight of you and of your assembled body, 20. When on the trial your dignity procured me the fruit of my diligence, I gained thus much, that in the same hour that I began to speak, I cut off from that audacious, wealthy, extravagant, and abandoned criminal, all hope of corrupting the judges. That on the very first day, when such a number of witnesses had been brought forward, the Roman people determined that if he were acquitted, the Republic would no longer exist. That the second day took away from his friends, not only all hope of victory, but even all inclination to make any defense. That the third day prostrated the man so entirely, that, pretending to be sick, he took counsel, not what reply he could make, but how he could avoid making any. And after that, on the subsequent days, he was so oppressed and overwhelmed by these accusations, by these witnesses, both from the city and from the provinces, that when these days of the games intervened, no one thought that he had procured an adjournment, but they thought that he was condemned. 821. So that, as far as I am concerned, O judges, I gained the day. For I did not desire the spoils of Caius Terrorus, but the good opinion of the Roman people. It was my business to act as accuser only if I had a good cause. What cause was ever juster than the being appointed and selected by as illustrious a province as its defender? To consult the welfare of the Republic. How could be more honorable for the Republic, than while the tribunals were in such general discredit, to bring before them a man by whose condemnation the whole order of the Senate might be restored to credit and favor with the Roman people? O prove and convince men that it was a guilty man who was brought to trial? Who is there of the Roman people who did not carry away this conviction from the previous pleading, that if all the wickednesses, thefts, and enormities of all who have ever been condemned before were brought together into one place, they could scarcely be likened or compared to but a small part of this man's crimes? 22. Judges, consider and deliberate what becomes your fame, your reputation, and the common safety. Your eminence prevents your being able to make any mistake without the greatest injury and danger to the Republic. For the Roman people cannot hope that there are any other men in the Senate who can judge uprightly, if you cannot. It is inevitable that, when it has learned to despair of the whole order, it should look for another class of men and another system of judicial proceedings. If this seems to you at all a trifling matter, because you think that being judge is a great and inconvenient burden, you ought to be aware, in the first place, that it makes a difference whether you throw off that burden yourselves, of your own accord, or whether the power of sitting as judges is taken away from you because you have been unable to convince the Roman people of your good faith and scrupulous honesty. In the second place, consider this also, with what great danger you shall come before those judges whom the Roman people, by reason of its hatred to you, as well shall judge concerning you. 23. But I will tell you, O judges, what I am sure of. No, then, when there are some men who are possessed with such a hatred for your order, that they now make a practice of openly saying that they are willing for that man, whom they know to be a most infamous one, to be acquitted for this one reason, at them the honor or the judgment seat may be taken from the Senate with ignominy and disgrace. It is not my fear for your good faith, O judges, which has urged me to lay these considerations before you at some length, but the new hopes which those men are entertaining. For when those hopes had brought Varus suddenly back from the gates of the city to this port, some men suspected that his intention had not been changed so suddenly without a cause. 924. Now, in order that Hortensius may not be able to employ any new sort of complaint, and to say that a defendant is oppressed if the accuser says nothing about him, that nothing is so dangerous to the fortunes of an innocent man as for his adversaries to keep silence. And in order that he may not praise my abilities in a way which I do not like, when he says that, if I had said much, I should have relieved him against whom I was speaking, and that I have undone him because I said nothing, I will comply with his wishes. I shall employ one long and broken speech, not because it is necessary, but that I may try whether he will be most vexed at my having been silent then or at my speaking now. 25. Here you, perhaps, will take care that I do not remit 1 hour of the time allowed me by law. If I do not employ the whole time which is allowed me by law, you will complain. You will invoke the faith of gods and men, calling them to witness how Caius Verus is circumvented because the prosecutor will not speak as long as he is allowed to speak by the law. What the law gives me for my own sake, may I not be allowed to forbear using? For the time for stating the accusation is given me for my own sake, that I may be able to unfold my charges and the whole cause in my speech. If I do not use it all, I do you no injury, but I give up something of my own right and advantage. You injure me, says he, for the cause ought to be thoroughly investigated. Certainly, for otherwise a defendant cannot be condemned, however guilty he may be. Were you, then, indignant that anything should be done by me to make it less easy for him to be condemned? For if the cause be understood, many men may be acquitted. If it be not understood, no one can be condemned. 26. I injure him, it seems, for I take away the right of adjournment. The most vexatious thing that the law has in it, the allowing a cause to be twice pleaded, has either been instituted for my sake rather than for yours, or, at all events, not more for your sake than for mine. Or if to speak twice be an advantage, certainly it is an advantage which is common to both if there is a necessity that he who has spoken last should be refuted. Then it is for the sake of the prosecutor that he has been established that there should be a second discussion. But, as I imagine, Lasha first proposed the law that the defendant might have an adjournment. Before that time the decision might either be given at once, or the judges might take time to consider. Which law, then, do you think the mildest? I think that ancient one, by which a man might either be acquitted quickly, or condemned after deliberation. I restore you that law of Achilles, according to which many men who have only been accused once, whose cause has only been pleaded once, in whose case witnesses have only been heard once, have been condemned on charges by no means so clearly proved, nor so flagitious as those on which you are convicted. Think that you are pleading your cause, not according to that severe law, but according to that most merciful one. I will accuse you. You shall reply. Having produced my witnesses, I will lay the whole matter before the bench in such a way, that even if the law gave them a power of adjournment, yet they shall think it discreditable to themselves not to decide at the first hearing. 1027 But if it be necessary for the cause to be thoroughly investigated, has this one been investigated but superficially? Are we keeping back anything, O Hortensius, a trick which we have often seen practiced in pleading? Whoever attends much to the advocate in this sort of action, in which anything is said to have been carried off and stolen by anyone, is not all the expectation of the judges fixed on the documents or on the witnesses? I said in the first pleading that I would make it plain that Caius Verus had carried off 400,000 sesterces contrary to the law. What ought I to have said? Should I have pleaded more plainly if I had related the whole affair thus? Here was a certain man of Melissa, named Dio, who, when a great inheritance had come to his son from a relation while Sacerdos was praetor, had at the time no trouble nor dispute about it. Verus, as soon as he arrived in the province, immediately wrote letters from Rosanna. He summoned Dio before him. He procured false witnesses from among his own friends to say that that inheritance had been forfeited to Venus or Icena. He announced that he himself would take cognizance of that matter. 28 I can detail to you the whole affair in regular order, and at last tell you what the result was, namely, that Dio paid 1,000,000 of sesterces, in order to prevail in a cause of most undeniable justice, besides that Verus had his herds of hares driven away, and all his plate and embroidered vestments carried off. But neither while I was so relating these things, nor while you were denying them, would our speeches be of any great importance. At what time then would the judge prick up his ears and begin to strain his attention? When Dio himself came forward, and the others who had at that time been engaged in Sicily on Dio's business, when, at the very time when Dio was pleading his cause, he was proved to have borrowed money, to have gailed in all that was owing to him, to have sold farms. When the accounts of respectable men were produced, when they who had supplied Dio with money said that they had heard at the time that the money was taken on purpose to be given to Verus. When the friends, and connections, and patrons of Dio, most honorable men, said that they had heard the same thing. 29 Then, when this was going on, you would, I suppose, attend as you did attend. Then the cause would seem to be going on. Everything was managed by me in the former pleadings so that among all the charges there was not one in which any one of you desired an uninterrupted statement of the case. I deny that anything was said by the witnesses which was either obscure to any one of you, or which required the eloquence of any orator to set it off. 11 inches true. You must recollect that I conducted the case in this way. I set forth and detailed the whole charge at the time of the examination of witnesses, so that as soon as I had explained the whole affair, I then immediately examined the witnesses. And by that means, not only you, who have to judge, are in possession of our charges, but also the Roman people became acquainted with the whole accusation and the whole cause, although I am speaking of my own conduct as if I had done so of my own will rather than because I was induced to do so by any injustice of yours. 30 But you interposed another accuser, who, when I had only demanded 110 days to prosecute my inquiries in Sicily, demanded 108 for himself to go for a similar purpose into Achaia. When you had deprived me of the 3 months most suitable for conducting my cause, you thought that I would give you up the remainder of the year, so that, when he had employed the time allowed to me, you, O Hortensius, after the interruption of 2 festivals, might make your reply 40 days afterwards. And then, that the time might be so spun out, that we might come from Marius Sclavio, the praetor, and from the greater part of these judges, to another praetor, and other judges. 31 If I had not seen this of everyone, both acquaintances and strangers, and not warned me that the object which they were driving at, which they were contriving, for which they were striving, was to cause the matter to be delayed to that time supposed, if I had chosen to spend all the time allowed me in stating the accusation, I should be under apprehensions that I should not have charges enough to bring, that subjects for a speech would be wanting to me, that my voice and strength would fail me, that I should not be able to accuse twice a man whom no one had dared to defend at the first pleading of the cause. I made my conduct appear reasonable both to the judges and also to the Roman people. There is no one who thinks that their injustice and impudence could have been opposed by any other means. Indeed, how great would have been my folly, if, though I might have avoided it, I had allowed matters to come on the day which they who had undertaken to deliver him from justice provided for in their undertaking, when they gave their undertaking to deliver him in these words if the trial took place on or after the 1st of January. 32 Now I must provide for the careful management of the time which is allowed me for making a speech, since I am determined to state the whole case most fully. 12 Therefore I will pass by that first act of his life, most infamous and most wicked as it was. He shall hear nothing from me of the vices and offenses of his childhood, nothing about his most dissolute youth, how that youth was spent, you either remember, or else you can recognize it in the son whom he has brought up to be so like himself. I will pass over everything which appears shameful to be mentioned. And I will consider not only what that fellow ought to have said of himself, but also what it becomes me to say. Do you, I entreat you, permit this, and grant to my modesty, that it may be allowed to pass over in silence some portion of his shamelessness. 33 At that time which passed before he came into office and became a public character, he may have free and untouched as far as I am concerned. Nothing shall be said of his drunken nocturnal revels. No mention shall be made of his pimps, and dicers, and panders. His losses at play, and the licentious transactions which the estate of his father and his own age prompted him to shall be passed over in silence. He may have lived in all infamy at that time with impunity, as far as I am concerned. The rest of his life has been such that I can well afford to put up with the loss of not mentioning those enormities. 34 You were questors to Knaus Furious the consul 14 years ago. All that you have done from that day to this day I bring before the court. Not 1 hour will be found free from theft, from wickedness, from cruelty, from atrocity. These years have been passed by you in the questorship, and in the lieutenancy in Asia, and in the city praetorship, and in the Sicilian praetorship. On which account a division of my whole action will also be made into 4 parts. 13 As questor you received our province by lot, according to the decree of the Senate. A consular province fell to your lot, so that you were with Knaus Carbo, the consul, and had that province. There was at that time dissension among the citizens, and in that I'm not going to say anything as to what part you ought to have taken. This only do I say, that at such a time as that you ought to have made up your mind which side you would take and which party you would espouse. Carbo was very indignant that there had fallen to his lot as his questor a man of such notorious luxury and indolence, but he loaded him with all sorts of kindnesses. Not to dwell too long on this. Money was voted, was paid. 2. He went as questor to the province. He came into Gaul, where he had been for some time expected, to the army of the consul with the money. At the very first opportunity that offered, take notice of the principle on which the man discharged the duties of his offices, and administered the affairs of the republic. The questor, having embezzled the public money, deserted the consul, the army, and his allotted province. 35 I see what I have done. He rouses himself up. He hopes that, in the instance of this charge, some breeze may be wafted this way of goodwill and approbation for those men to whom the name of Knaus Carbo, though dead, is unwelcome, and to whom he hopes that desertion and betrayal of his consul will prove acceptable. As if he had done it from any desire to take the part of the nobility, or from any party zeal, and had not rather openly pillaged the consul, the army and the province, and then, because of this most impudent theft, had run away. For such an action as that is obscure, and such that one may suspect that Caius Ferrers, because he could not bear new men, passed over to the nobility, that is, to his own party, and that he did nothing from consideration of money. 36 Let us see how he gave in his accounts. Now he himself will show why he left Knaus Carbo. Now he himself will show what he is. 14 First of all take notice of their brevity I received, says he, 2,235,417 sesterces. I spent, or paid to the soldiers, for corn, for the lieutenants, for the professor, for the praetorian cohort, 1,635,417 sesterces. I left at Ariminum 600,000 sesterces. Is this giving an accounts? Did either I, or you, O Hortensius, or any man ever given his accounts in this manner? What does this mean? What impudence it is? What audacity? What precedent is there of any such in all the number of accounts that have ever been rendered by public officers? And yet these 600,000 sesterces, as to which he could not even devise a false account of whom he had paid them to, and which he said he had left at Ariminum, these 600,000 sesterces which he had in hand, Carbo never touched, Sulla never saved them, nor were these ever brought into the treasury. He selected Ariminum as the town, because at the time when he was giving his accounts, it had been taken and plundered. 3. He did not suspect, what he shall now find out, that plenty of the Araminians were left to us after that disaster as witnesses to the point. Read now 7 accounts rendered to Publius Lentulus, and Lucius Triarius, quaestors of the city. Read on according to the decree of the Senate. In order to be allowed to give in accounts in such a manner as this, he became one of Sulla's party in an instant, and not for the sake of contributing to the restoration of honor and dignity to the nobility. Even if you had deserted empty-handed, still your desertion would be decided to be wicked, your betrayal of your consul, infamous. Oh, Knaus Carbo was a bad citizen, a scandalous consul, a seditious man. He may have been so to others, when did he begin to be so to you? After he entrusted to you the money, the supplying of corn, all his accounts, and his army. For if he had displeased you before that, you would have done the same as Marcus Piso did the year after. When he had fallen by lot to Lucius Scipio, as consul, he never touched the money, he never joined the army at all. The opinions he embraced concerning the republic he embraced so as to do no violence to his own good faith, to the customs of our ancestors, nor to the obligations imposed on him by the lot which he had drawn. 1538 Inch is true. If we wish to disturb all these things, and to throw them into confusion, we shall render life full of danger, intrigue, and enmity. If such allurements are to have no scruples to protect them. If the connection between men in prosperous and doubtful fortunes is to cause no friendship. If the customs and principles of our ancestors are to have no authority. He is the common enemy of all men who has once been the enemy of his own connections. No wise man ever thought that a traitor was to be trusted. Sulla himself, to whom the arrival of the fellow ought to have been most acceptable, removed him from himself and from his army. He ordered him to remain at Beneventum, among those men whom he believed to be exceedingly friendly to his party, where he could do no harm to his cause and could have no influence on the termination of the war. Afterwards, indeed, he rewarded him liberally. He allowed him to seize some estates of men who had been proscribed lying in the territory of Beneventum. He loaded him with honor as a traitor. He put no confidence in him as a friend. 39 Now, although there are men who hate Knaus Carbo, though dead, yet they ought to think, not what they were glad to have happen, but what they themselves would have to fear in a similar case. This is a misfortune common to many, a cause for alarm, and a danger common to many. There are no intrigues more difficult to guard against than those which are concealed under a pretense of duty, or under the name of some intimate connection. For you can easily avoid one who is openly an adversary, by guarding against him. But this secret, internal, and domestic evil not only exists, but even overwhelms you before you can proceed or examine into it. Is it not so? 40 When you were sent as quaestor to the army, not only as guardian of the money, but also of the consul. When you were the sharer in all his business and of all his counsels, when you were considered by him as one of his own children, according to the tenor of the principles of our ancestors. Could you on the sudden leave him? Desert him? Pass over to the enemy? O wickedness! O monster to be banished to the very end of the world! But that nature which has committed such an atrocity as this cannot be contented with this one crime alone. It must be always contriving something of the sort. It must be occupied in similar audacity and perfidy. 41 Therefore, that same fellow whom Cnaeus Dolabella afterwards, when Caius Malleolus had been slain, had for his questor, I know not whether this connection was not even a closer one than the connection with Carbo, and whether the consideration of his having been voluntarily chosen is not stronger than that of his having been chosen by lot, behaved to Cnaeus Dolabella in the same manner as he had behaved into Cnaeus Carbo. For, the charges which properly touched himself, he transferred to his shoulders, and gave information of everything connected with his cause to his enemies and accusers. He himself gave most hostile and most infamous evidence against the man to whom he had been lieutenant and proquestor. Dolabella, unfortunate as he was, through his abominable betrayal, through his infamous and false testimony, was injured far more than by either, by the odium created by that fellow's own thefts and atrocities. 1642 What can you do with such a man? Or what hope can you allow so perfidious, so ill-omened an animal to entertain? One who despised and trampled on the lot which bound him to Cnaeus Carbo, the choice which connected him with Cnaeus Dolabella, and not only deserted them both, but also betrayed and attacked them. Do not, I beg of you, O judges, judge of his crimes by the brevity of my speech rather than by the magnitude of the actions themselves. For I am forced to make haste in order to have time to set before you all the things which I have resolved to relate to you. Wherefore, now that his questorship has been put before you, saw that the dishonesty and wickedness of his first conduct in his first office has been thoroughly seen, listen, I pray you, to the remainder. 43 And in this I will pass over that period of proscription and rapine which took place under Sulla. Nor will I allow him to derive any argument for his own defense from that time of common calamity to all men. I will accuse him of nothing but his own peculiar and well-proved crimes. Therefore, omitting all mention of the time of Sulla from the accusation, consider that splendid lieutenancy of his. After Cilicia was appointed to Cnaeus Dolabella as his province, O ye immortal gods! With what covetousness, with what incessant applications, did he force from him that lieutenancy for himself, which was indeed the beginning of the greatest calamity to Dolabella. For as he proceeded on his journey to the province, wherever he went his conduct was such, that it was not some lieutenant of the Roman people, but rather some calamity that seemed to be going through the country. 1744 Inches Achaia, I will omit all minor things, to some of which perhaps someone else may sometime or other have done something like. I will mention nothing except what is unprecedented, nothing except what would appear incredible, if it were alleged against any other criminal. He demanded money from a Sicyonian magistrate. Do not let this be considered a crime in errors. Others have done the same. When he could not give it, he punished him. A scandalous, but still not an unheard of act. Listen to the sort of punishment. You will ask, of what race of men you are to think him a specimen. He ordered a fire to be made of frame and damp wood in a narrow place. There he left a free man, a noble in his own country, an ally and friend of the Roman people, tortured with smoke, half dead. 45 After that, what statues, what pains he carried off from Achaia, I will not mention at present. There is another part of my speech which I have reserved for speaking of this covetousness of the man. You have heard that at Athens a great sum of money was taken out of the temple of Minerva. This was mentioned in the trial of Cnaeus Dolabella. Mentioned? The amount due was stated. Of this design you will find that Caius Verus was not only a partaker, but was even the chief instigator. 46 He came to Delos. There from the most holy temple of Apollo he privately took away by night the most beautiful and ancient statues, and took care that they were all placed on board his own transport. The next day, when the inhabitants of Delos saw their temple plundered, they were very indignant. For the holiness and antiquity of that temple is so great in their eyes, that they believe that Apollo himself was born in that place. However, they did not dare to say one word about it, lest haply Dolabella himself might be concerned in the business. 18 Then on the sudden a very great tempest arose, O judges. So that Dolabella could not only not depart, when he wished, but could scarcely stand in the city, such vast waves were dashed on shore. Here that ship of the pirate loaded with the consecrated statues, being cast up and driven ashore by the waves, is broken to pieces. Those statues of Apollo were found on the shore. By command of Dolabella they are restored. The tempest is lulled. Dolabella departs from Delos. 47 I do not doubt, though there was no feeling of humanity ever in you, no regard for holiness, still that now in your fear and danger thoughts of your wicked actions occur to you. Can there be any comfortable hope of safety cherished by you, when you recollect how impious, how wicked, how blasphemous has been your conduct towards the immortal gods? Did you dare to plunder the Delian Apollo? Did you dare to lay impious and sacrilegious hands on that temple, so ancient, so venerated, so holy? If you were not in your childhood taught and framed to learn and know what has been committed to writing, still would ye not afterwards, when you came into the very places themselves, learn and believe what is handed down both by tradition and by documents. 48 That Latona, after a long wandering and persecution, pregnant, and now near bringing forth, when her time was come, fled to Delos, and there brought forth Apollo and Diana. From which belief of men that island is considered sacred to those gods. And such is and always has been the influence of that religious belief, that not even the Persians, when they waged war on all Greece, on gods and men, and when they had put in with a fleet of 1,000 ships at Delos, attempted to violate, or even to touch anything. Did you, O most wicked, O most insane of men, attempt to plunder this temple? Was any covetousness of such power as to extinguish such solemn religious belief? And if you did not think of this at that time, do you not recollect even now that there is no evil so great as not to have been long since due to you for your wicked actions? 1949 But after he arrived in Asia, how should I enumerate the dinners, the suppers, the horses, and the presents which marked that progress? I am not going to say anything against Verus for everyday crimes. I say that he carried off by force some most beautiful statues from Hyades. Also from Erythri. Also from Halicarnassus. From Tenido that passed over the money which he seized he carried off Tenes himself, who among the Tenedians is considered a most holy god, who is said to have founded that city, after whose name it is called Tenedos. This very Tenes, I say, most admirably wrought, which you have seen before now in the assembly, he carried off amid the great lamentations of the city. 50 But that storming of the most ancient and most noble temple of the Samian Juno, how grievous was it to the Samians? How bitter to all Asia? How notorious to all men? How notorious to every one of you? And when ambassadors had come from Samos into Asia to Caius Nero, to complain of this attack on that temple, they received for answer, that complaints of that sort, which concern a lieutenant of the Roman people, ought not to be brought before the praetor, but must be carried to Rome. What pictures did he carry off from thence? What statues? Which I saw lately in his house, when I went thither for the sake of sealing it up. 51 And where are those statues now, O Verus? I mean those which I lately saw in your house against every pillar, and also in every space between two pillars, and actually arranged in a row in the open air? Why were those things left at your house, as long as you thought that another praetor, with the other judges whom you expected to have substituted in the room of ease, was to sit in judgment upon your? But when you saw that we preferred suiting the convenience of our own witnesses rather than your convenience as to time, you left not one statue in your house except two which were in the middle of it, and which were themselves stolen from Samos. Did you not think that I would summon your most intimate friends to give evidence of this matter, who had often been at your house, and ask of them whether they knew that statues were there which were not? 2052 What did you think that these men would think of you then, when they saw that you were no longer contending against your accuser, but against the pester and the brokers? 6. On 7. Which matter you heard Jarednus of Caius give his evidence at the formal pleadings, that he, when he was captain of Atrari, and was attending Verus on his departure from Asia, was within at Samos, by command of Dolabella, and that he then knew that the temple of Juno had been plundered, and the town of Samos. That afterwards he had been put on his trial before the Chians, his fellow citizens, on the accusation of the Samians. And that he had been acquitted because he had made it plain that the allegations of the Samians concerned Verus, and not him. 53 You know that Aspendus is an ancient and noble town in Pamphylia, full of very fine statues. I do not say that one statue or another was taken away from thence, this I say, that you, O Verus, left not one statue at Aspendus. That everything from the temples and from all public places was openly seized and carried away on wagons, the citizens all looking on. And he even carried off that harp player of Aspendus, of whom you have often heard the saying, which is a proverb among the Greeks, who used to say that he could sing everything within himself, and put him in the inmost part of his own house, so as to appear to have surpassed the statue itself in trickery. 54 At Perga we are aware that there is a very ancient and very holy temple of Diana. That too, I say, was stripped and plundered by you. And all the gold which there was on Diana herself was taken off and carried away. What, in the name of mischief, can such audacity and inanity mean? In the very cities of our friends and allies, which you visited under the pretext of your office as lieutenant, if you had stormed them by force with an army, and had exercised military rule there. Still, I think, the statues and ornaments which you took away, you would have carried, not to your own house, nor to the spurred villas of your friends, but to Rome for the public use. 2155 Why should I speak of Marcus Marcellus, who took Syracuse, that most beautiful city? Why of Lucius Scipio, who waged war in Asia, and conquered Antiochus, a most powerful monarch? Why of Flaminius, who subdued Philip the king, and Macedonia? Why of Lucius Paulus, who with his might and valor conquered King Persis? Why of Lucius Mummius, who overthrew that most beautiful and elegant city Corinth, full of all sorts of riches, and brought many cities of Achaia and Boeotia under the empire and dominion of the Roman people? Their houses, though they were rich in virtue and honor, were empty of statues and paintings. But we see the whole city, the temples of the gods, and all parts of Italy, adorned with their gifts, and with memorials of them. 56 I am afraid all this may seem to some people too ancient, and long ago obsolete. For at that time all men were so uniformly disposed in the same manner, that this credit of eminence, virtue, and incorruptibility appears to belong, not only to those men, but also to those times. Publius Servilius, a most illustrious man, who has performed the noblest exploits, is present. He will deliver his opinion on your conduct. He, by his power, had forces. His wisdom and his valor took Olympus, an ancient city, and one strengthened and embellished in every possible manner. I am bringing forward recent example of a most distinguished man. For Servilius, as a general of the Roman people, took Olympus after you, as lieutenant of the quaestor in the same district, had taken care to harass and plunder all the cities of our friends and allies even when they were at peace. 57 The things which you carried off from the holiest temples with wickedness, and like the robber, we cannot see, except in your own houses, or in those of your friends. The statues and decorations which Publius Servilius brought away from the cities of our enemies, taken by his courage and valor, according to the laws of war and his own rights as commander-in-chief, he brought home for the Roman people. He carried them in his triumph, and took care that a description of them should be engraved on public tablets and hid up in the treasury. You may learn from public documents the industry of a most honorable man. Read the accounts delivered by Publius Servilius. You see not only the number of the statues, but the size, the figure, and the condition of each one among them accurately described in writing. Certainly, the delight arising from virtue and from victory is much greater than the pleasure which is derived from licentiousness and covetousness. I say that Servilius took much more care to have the booty of the Roman people noted and described, than you took to have your plunder catalogued. 2258 You will say that your statues and paintings were also an ornament to the city and form of the Roman people. I recollect, I, together with the Roman people, saw the form and place for holding the assemblies adorned with embellishments, in appearance indeed magnificent, but to one's senses and thoughts bitter and melancholy. I saw everything glittering with your thefts, with the plunder of the provinces, with the spoils of our allies and friends. At which time, O judges, that fellow conceived the hope of committing his other crimes. For he saw that these men, who wished to be called the masters of the courts of law, were slaves to these desires. 59 But the allies and foreign nations then first abandoned the hope of saving any of their property and fortunes, because, as it happened, there were at that time very many ambassadors from Asia and Achaia at Rome, who worshipped in the form the images of the gods which had been taken from their temples, and so also, when they recognized the other statues and ornaments, they wept, as they beheld the different pieces of their property in different place. And from all those men we then used to hear discourses of this sort, that it was impossible for anyone to doubt of the ruin of our allies and friends, when men saw in the form of the Roman people, in which formerly those men used to be accused and condemned who had done any injury to the allies, those things now open in face which had been wickedly seized and taken away from the allies. 60 here I do not expect that he will deny that he has many statues, and countless paintings. But, as I fancy, he is accustomed at times to say that he purchased these things which he seized and stole. Since indeed he was sent at the public expense, and with the title of ambassador, into Achaia, Asia, and Pamphylia as a purchaser of statues and paintings. 23 I have all the accounts both of the fellow and of his father, of money received, which I have most carefully read and arranged. Those of your father, as long as you live, you own, as far as you say that you have made them up. For in that man, O judges, you will find this new thing. We hear that some men have never kept accounts, which is a mistaken opinion of men with respect to Antonius. For he kept them most carefully. But there may be men of that sort, but they are by no means to be approved of. We hear that some men have not kept them from the beginning, but after some time have made them up. There is a way of accounting for this too. But this is unprecedented and absurd which this man gave us for an answer, when we demanded his account of him, that he kept them up to the consulship of Marcus Terentius and Caius Cassius. But that, after that, he gave up keeping them. 61 In another place we will consider what sort of a reply this is. At present I am not concerned with it. For of the times about which I am at present occupied I have the accounts, both yours and those of your father. You cannot deny that you carried off very many most beautiful statues, very many admirable paintings. I wish you would deny it. Show in your accounts or in those of your father that any one of them was purchased, and you have gained your cause. There is not even any possibility of your having bought those two most beautiful statues which are now standing in your court, and which stood for many years by the folding doors of the Samian Juno. These two, I say, which are now the only statues left in your house, which are waiting for the broker, left alone and deserted by the other statues. 2462 But, I suppose in these matters alone had he this irrepressible and unbridled covetousness. His other desires were restrained by some reason and moderation. To how many noble virgins, to how many matrons do you think he offered violence in that foul and obscene lieutenancy? In what town did he set his foot that he did not leave more traces of his rapes and atrocities than he did of his arrival? But I will pass over everything which can be denied. Even those things which are most certain and most evident I will omit. I will select one of his abominable deeds, in order that I may more easily at last arrive at Sicily, which has imposed the burden of this business on me. 63 There is a town on the Hellespont, O judges, called Lamsicus, among the first in the province of Asia for renown and for nobleness. And the citizens themselves of Lamsicus are most especially kind to all Roman citizens, and also are an especially quiet and orderly race. Almost beyond all the rest of the Greeks inclined to the most perfect ease, rather than to any disorder or tumult. It happened, when he had prevailed on Cnous Dolabella to send him to King Nicomedes and to King Sadala, and when he had begged this expedition, more with a view to his own gain than to any advantage for the Republic, that in that journey he came to Lamsicus, to the great misfortune and almost ruin of the city. He is conducted to the house of a man named Janitor as his host. And his companions also, are billeted on other entertainers. As was the fellow's custom, and as his lusts always instigating him to commit some wickedness prompted him, he immediately gives a commission to his companions, the most worthless and infamous of men, to inquire and find out whether there is any virgin woman worthy of his staying longer at Lamsicus for her sake. 2564 He had a companion of the name of Rubrius, a man made for such vices as his, who used to find out all these things for him wherever he went, with wonderful address. He brings him the following news, that there was a man of the name of Philodemus, in birth, in rank, in wealth, and in reputation by far the first man among the citizens of Lamsicus. That his daughter, who was living with her father because she had not yet got a husband, was a woman of extraordinary beauty, but was also considered exceedingly modest and virtuous. The fellow, when he heard this, was so inflamed with desire for that which he had not only not seen himself, but which even he from whom he heard of it had not seen himself, that he said he should like to go to Philodemus immediately. Janitor, his host, who suspected nothing, being afraid that he must have given him some offense himself, endeavored with all his might to detain him. There was, as he could not find any pretext for leaving his host's house, began to pave his way for his meditated violence by other steps. He says that Rubrius, his most loved friend, his assistant in all such matters, and the partner of his counsels, is lodged with but little comfort. He orders him to be conducted to the house of Philodemus 65 but when this is reported to Philodemus, although he was ignorant what great misfortune was at that moment being contrived for him and for his children, still he comes to him, represents to him that that is not his office, and when it was his turn to receive guests, he was accustomed to receive the praetors and consuls themselves, and not the attendants of lieutenants. There was, as he was hurried on by that one desire alone, disregarded all his demands and allegations, and ordered Rubrius to be introduced by force into the house of a man who had a right to refuse him admittance. 26 On this, Philodemus, when he could not preserve his rights, studied at least to preserve his courtesy and affability. He who had always been considered most hospitable and most friendly towards our people, did not like to appear to have received even this fellow Rubrius into his house unwillingly. He prepares a banquet magnificently and luxuriously, being, as he was, among the richest of all his fellow citizens. He begs Rubrius to invite whoever were agreeable to himself. To leave, if he pleased, just room for himself alone. He even sends his own son, a most excellent youth, out to one of his relations to supper. 66 Rubrius invites Verres' companions. Verres informs them all what there was to be done. They come early. They sit down to supper. Conversation takes place among them, and an invitation is given to drink in the Greek fashion. The host encourages them. They demand wine in larger goblets. The banquet proceeds with the conversation and joy of everyone. When the business appeared to Rubrius to have got warm enough, I would know of you, O Philodemus, says he, why you do not bid your daughter to be invited in hither to us. The man, who was both a most dignified man, and of mature age, and a parent, was amazed at the speech of the rascal. Rubrius began to urge it. Then he, in order to give some answer, said that it was not the custom of the Greeks for women to sit down at the banquets of men. On this, someone else from some other part of the room cried out, "But this is not to be borne. Let the women be summoned." And immediately Rubrius orders his slaves to shut the door, and to stand at the doors themselves. 67 But when Philodamus perceived that what was intended and being prepared was, that violence should be offered to his daughter, he calls his servants to him, he bids them disregard him and defend his daughter, and orders someone to run out and bear the news to his son of this overpowering domestic misfortune. Meantime an uproar arises throughout the whole house. A fight takes place between the slaves of Rubrius and his host. That noble and most honorable man is buffeted about in his own house. Everyone fights for his own safety. At last Philodamus has a quantity of boiling water thrown over him by Rubrius himself. When the news of this is brought to the son, half dead with alarm, he instantly hastens home to bring aid to save the life of his father and the modesty of his sister. All the citizens of Lampsacus, with the same spirit, the moment they heard of it, because both the worth of Philodamus and the enormity of the injury excited them, assembled by night at his house. At this time Cornelius, the lictor of bearers, who had been placed with his slaves by Rubrius, as if on guard, for the purpose of carrying off the woman, is slain. Some of the slaves are wounded. Rubrius himself is wounded in the crowd. Bearers, when he saw such an uproar excited by his own cupidity, began to wish to escape some way or other if he could. 2768 The next morning men come early to the public assembly. They ask what is best to be done. Everyone delivered his own opinions to the people according as each individual had the most weight. No one was found whose opinion and speech was not to this purpose, that it need not be feared, if the Lampsacines had avenged that man's atrocious wickedness by force and by the sword, that the Senate and Roman people would have thought they ought to chastise their city. And if the lieutenants of the Roman people were to establish this law with respect to the allies, and to foreign nations, that they were not to be allowed to preserve the chastity of their children unpolluted by their lusts, it was better to endure anything rather than to live in a state of such violence and bitterness. 69 As all were of this opinion, and as every one spoke in this tenor, as his own feelings and indignation prompted each individual, all immediately proceeded towards the house where Verus was staying. They began to beat the door with stones, to attack it with weapons, to surround it with wood and faggots, and to apply fire to it. Then the Roman citizens who were dwelling as traitors at Lampsacus run together to the spot. They entreat the citizens of Lampsacus to allow the name of the lieutenancy to have more weight with them than the insult of the lieutenant. They say that they were well aware that he was an infamous and wicked man, but as he had not accomplished what he had attempted, and as he was not going to be at Lampsacus any longer, their error in sparing a wicked man would be less than that of not sparing a lieutenant. Suddenly and so that fellow, far more wicked and infamous than even the notorious Hadrian, 8, was a good deal more fortunate. He, because Roman citizens could not tolerate his avarice, was burnt alive at Utica in his own house. And that was thought to have happened to him so deservedly, that all men rejoiced, and no punishment was inflicted for the deed. This man, scorched indeed though he was by the fire made by our allies, yet escaped from those flames and that danger. And has not even yet been able to imagine what he had done, or what had happened to bring him into such great danger. For he cannot say, when I was trying to put down a sedition, when I was ordering corn, when I was collecting money for the soldiers, when in short I was doing something or other for the sake of the Republic, because I gave some strict order, because I punished someone, because I threatened someone, all this happened. Even if he were to say so, still he ought not to be pardoned, if he seemed to have been brought into such great danger through issuing 2 savage commands to our allies. 2871 Now when he neither dares himself to allege any such cause for the tumult as being true, nor even to invent such a falsehood, but when a most temperate man of his own order, who at that time was in attendance on Caius Nero, Publius Tedius, says that he too heard this same account at Lampsacus, a man most accomplished in everything, Caius Varro, who was at that time in Asia as military tribune, says that he heard this very same story from Philodamus. Can you doubt that fortune was willing, not so much to save him from that danger, as to reserve him for your judgment? Unless, indeed, he will say, as indeed Hortensius did say, interrupting Tedius while he was giving his evidence in the former pleading, at which time indeed he gave plenty of proof that, if there were anything which he could say, he could not keep silence. So that we may all feel sure that, while he was silent in the other matters that were alleged, he was so because he had nothing to say. He at that time said this, that Philodamus and his son had been condemned by Caius Nero 72, about which, not to make a long speech, I will merely say that Nero and his bench of judges came to that decision on the ground that it was plain that Cornelius, his lictor, had been slain, and that they thought it was not right that anyone, even while avenging his own injuries, should have the power to kill a man. And as to this I see that you were not by Nero's sentence acquitted of atrocity, but that they were convicted of murder. And yet what sort of a conviction was that? Listen, I entreat you, O judges, and do sometimes pity our allies, and show that they ought to have, and that they have, some protection in your integrity. 29 Because the man appeared to all Asia to have been lawfully slain, being in name indeed his lictor, but in reality the minister of his most profligate desires, Verus feared that Philodamus would be acquitted by the sentence of Nero. He begs and entreats Dolabella to leave his own province, to go to Nero. He shows that he himself cannot be safe if Philodamus be allowed to live and at any time to come to Rome. 73 Dolabella was moved. He did what many blamed, in leaving his army, his province, and the war, and in going into Asia, into the province of another magistrate, for the sake of a most worthless man. After he came to Nero, he urged him to take cognizance of the cause of Philodamus. He came himself to sit on the bench, and to be the first to deliver his opinion. He had brought with him also his prefects, and his military tribunes, all of whom Nero invited to take their places on the bench. On that bench also was that most just Judge Verus himself. There were some Romans also, creditors of some of the Greeks, to whom the favor of any lieutenant, be he ever so infamous, is of the greatest influence in enabling them to get him their money. 74 The unhappy prisoner could find no one to defend him. For what citizen was there who was not under the influence of Dolabella? What Greek who was not afraid of his power and authority? And then is assigned as the accuser a Roman citizen, one of the creditors of the Lampsacines. And if he would only say what that fellow ordered him to say, he was to be enabled to compel payment of his money from the people, by the aid of that same Verus' lictors. When all these things were conducted with such zeal, and with such resources. When many were accusing that unhappy man, and no one was defending him. And when Dolabella, with his prefects, was taking a near part on the bench. When Verus kept saying that his fortunes were at stake, and he also gave his evidence, and he also was sitting on the bench, and he also had provided the accuser. When all this was done, and when it was clear that the man had been slain, still, so great was the weight which the consideration of that fellow's injury had, so great was his iniquity thought, that the case of Philodemus was adjourned for further inquiry. 3075 Why need I now speak of the energy of Knaus Dolabella at the second hearing of the cause, of his tears, of his agitation of body and minds? Why need I describe the mind of Caius Nero, most virtuous and innocent man, but still on some occasions too timid and low-spirited? Who in that emergency had no idea what to do, unless, perchance as everyone wished him to do, to settle the matter without the intervention of Verus and Dolabella. Whatever had been done without their intervention all men would approve. But, as it was, the sentence which was given was thought not to have been pronounced judicially by Nero, but to have been extorted by Dolabella. For Philodemus and his son are convicted by a few votes, Dolabella is present. Urges and presses Nero to have them executed as speedily as possible, in order that as few as may be made bare of that man's nefarious wickedness. 76 There is exhibited in the marketplace of Laodicea a spectacle bitter, and miserable, and grievous to the whole province of Asia, an aged parent led forth to punishment, and on the other side a son. The one because he had defended the chastity of his children, the other because he had defended the life of his father and the fair fame of his sister. Each was weeping, he father, not for his own execution, but for that of his son. The son for that of his father. How many tears do you think that Nero himself sheds? How great do you think was the weeping of all Asia? How great the groans and lamentations of the citizens of Lampsacus, that innocent men, nobles, allies and friends of the Roman people, should be put to death by public execution, on account of the unprecedented wickedness and impious desires of one most profligate man? 77 After this, O Dolabella, no one can pity either you or your children, whom you have left miserable, in beggary and solitude. Was Verus so dear to you, that you should wish the disappointment of his lust to be expiated by the blood of innocent men? Did you lead your army and the enemy, in order by your own power and cruelly to diminish the dangers of that most wicked man? For, had you expected him to be an everlasting friend to you, because you had appointed him to act as your questor? Did you not know, that Knaus Carbo, the consul whose real questor he had been, had not only been deserted by him, but had also been deprived of his resources and his money, and nefariously attacked and betrayed by him? Therefore, you too experienced his perfidy when he joined your enemies, and he, himself a most guilty man, gave most damaging evidence against you, and he refused to give in his accounts to the treasury unless you were condemned. 9. 3178 Are your lusts, O Verus, to be so atrocious, that the provinces of the Roman people, that foreign nations, cannot limit and cannot endure them? Unless whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you desire, whatever you think of, is in a moment to be subservient to your nod, is at once to obey your lust and desire, are men to be sent into people's houses? Are the houses to be stormed? Are cities ought only the cities of enemies now reduced to peace, but are the cities of our allies and friends to be forced to have recourse to violence and to arms, in order to be able to repel from themselves and from their children the wickedness and lust of a lieutenant of the Roman people? For I ask of you, were you besieged at Lampsacus? Did that multitude begin to burn their house in which you were staying? Did the citizens of Lampsacus wish to burn a lieutenant of the Roman people alive? You cannot deny it. For I have your own evidence which you gave before Nero, have the letters which you sent to him. Recite the passage from his evidence. 79 The evidence of Caius Verus against Artemidorus is read. Recite the passages out of Verus' letters to Nero. Passages from the letters of Verus to Nero are read. Not long afterwards, they came into the house. Was the city of Lampsacus endeavoring to make war on the Roman people? Did it wish to revolt from our dominion or cast off the name of allies of Rome? For I see, and, from those things which I have read and heard, I am sure, that, if in any city a lieutenant of the Roman people has been, not only besieged, not only attacked with fire and sword, by violence, and by armed forces, but even to some extent actually injured, unless satisfaction be publicly made for the insult, war is invariably declared and waged against that city. 80 What, then, was the cause why the whole city of the Lampsacines ran, as you write yourself, from the assembly to your house? For neither in the letters which you sent to Nero, nor in your evidence, do you mention any reason for so important a disturbance. You say that you were besieged, that fire was applied to your house, that faggots were put around it. You say that your lictor was slain. You say that you did not dare appear in the public streets. But the cause of all this alarm you conceal. For if Rubrius had done any injury to anyone on his own account, and not at your instigation and for the gratification of your desires, they would rather have come to you to complain of the injury done by your companion, than have come to besiege you. As, therefore, he himself has concealed what the cause of that disturbance was, and as the witnesses produced by us have related it, do not both their evidence and his own continued silence prove the reason to be that which we have alleged? 3281 Will you then spare this man, O judges? Whose offenses are so great that they whom he injured could neither wait for the legitimate time to take their revenge, nor restrain to a future time the violence of their indignation. You were besieged? By whom? By the citizens of Lampsacus Arboros men, I suppose, or, at all events, men who despise the name of the Roman people. Say rather, men, by nature, by custom, and by education most gentle. Moreover, by condition, allies of the Roman people, by fortune our subjects, by inclination our suppliants, that it is evident to all men, that unless the bitterness of the injury and the enormity of the wickedness had been such that the Lampsacines thought it better to die than to endure it, they never would have advanced to such a pitch as to be more influenced by hatred of your lust than by fear of your office as lieutenant. 82 Do not, in the name of the immortal gods, I entreat you or not compel the allies and foreign nations to have recourse to such a refuge as that. And they must of necessity have recourse to it, unless you chastise such crimes. Nothing would ever have softened the citizens of Lampsacus towards him, except their believing that he would be punished at Rome. Although they had sustained such an injury that they could not sufficiently avenge it by any law in the world, yet they would have preferred to submit their griefs to our laws and tribunals, rather than to give way to their own feelings of indignation. You, when you have been besieged by so illustrious a city on account of your own wickedness and crime, can you have compelled men, miserable and maddened by calamity, as if in despair of our laws and tribunals, to fly to violence, to combat, and to arms? Can you have shown yourself in the towns and cities of our friends, not as a lieutenant of the Roman people, but as a lustful and inhuman tyrant? And among foreign nations you have injured the reputation of our dominion and our name by your infamy and your crimes. And you have, with difficulty, saved yourself from the sword of the friends of the Roman people, and escaped from the fire of its allies. Do you think you will find an asylum here? You are mistaken. He allowed you to escape alive that you might fall into our power here, not that you might find rest here. 3383. And you say that a judicial decision was come to that you were injuriously besieged for no reason at Lampsacus, because Philodemus and his son were condemned. What if I make it evident, by the evidence of a worthless man indeed, but still a competent witness in this matter, why the evidence of you yourself? Have you yourself transferred the reason of this siege laid to you, and the blame of it, to others? And that those whom you had accused were not punished? Then the decision of Nero will do you but little good. Recite the letters which he sent to Nero. The letter of Caius Verus to Nero is read. Themistocles and Thessalus. You write that Themistocles and Thessalus stirred up the people. What people? They who besieged you. Who endeavored to burn you alive. Where do you prosecute them? Where do you accuse them? Where do you defend the name and rights of a lieutenant? Will you say that that was settled by the trial of Philodemus? Let me have the evidence of Verus himself. 84. Let us see what that fellow said on his oath. Recite it. Being asked by the accuser, he answered that he was not prosecuting for that in this trial, that he intended to prosecute for that another time. How, then, does Nero's decision profit you? Oh, does the conviction of Philodemus? Though you, a lieutenant, had been besieged, and when, as you yourself write to Nero, a notorious injury had been done to the Roman people, and to the common cause of all lieutenants, you did not prosecute. You said that you intended to prosecute at some other time. When was that time? When have you prosecuted? Why have you taken so much from the rights of a lieutenant's rank? Why have you abandoned and betrayed the cause of the Roman people? Why have you passed over your own injuries, involved as they were in the public injury? Ought you not to have brought the cause before the Senate? To have complained of such atrocious injuries? To have taken care that those men who had excited the populace should be summoned by the letters of the consuls? 85. Lately, when Marcus Aurelius Scaurus made the demand, because he said that he as quaestor had been prevented by force at Ephesus from taking his servant out of the temple of Diana, who had taken refuge in that asylum, Pericles, an Ephesian, a most noble man, was summoned to Rome, because he was accused of having been the author of that wrong. If you had stated to the Senate that you, a lieutenant, had been so treated at Lampsacus, that your companions were wounded, your lictor slain, you yourself surrounded and nearly burnt, and that the ringleaders and principal actors and chiefs in the transaction were Themistocles and Thessalus, who, you write, were so, who would not have been moved? Who would not have thought that he was taking care of himself in chastising the injury which had been done to you? Who would not have thought that not only your cause but that the common safety was at stake in that matter? In truth, the name of Lieutenant 10 ought to be such as to pass in safety not only among the laws of allies, but even amid the arms of enemies. 3486. This crime committed at Lampsacus is very great. A crime of lust and of the most infamous desires. Listen now to a tale of avarice, but little less iniquitous of its sort. He demanded of the Milesians a ship to attend him to Myndus as a guard. They immediately gave him a light vessel, a beautiful one of its class, splendidly adorned and armed. With this guard he went to Myndus. For, as to the wool being public property which he carried off from the Milesians, as for his extravagance on his arrival, as for his insults and injuries offered to the Milesian magistrates, although they might be stated not only truly, but also with vehemence and with indignation, still I shall pass them all over, and reserve them for another time to be proved by evidence. At present listen to this which cannot possibly be suppressed, and at the same time cannot be mentioned with proper dignity. 87. He orders the soldiers and the crew to return from Myndus to Miletus on foot. He himself sold the beautiful light vessel, picked out of the 10 ships of the Milesians, to Lucius Magius and Lucius Rabius, who were living at Myndus. These are the men whom the Senate lately voted should be considered in the number of enemies. In this vessel they sailed to all the enemies of the Roman people, from Dianium, which is in Spain, to Sinope, which is in Pontus. O ye immortal gods! The incredible avarice, the unheard of audacity of such a proceeding. Did you dare to sell a ship of the Roman fleet, which the city of Miletus had assigned to you to attend upon you? If the magnitude of the crime, if the opinion of men, had no influence on you, did this, too, never occur to you, at so illustrious and so noble a city would he a witness against you of this most wicked theft, or rather of this most abominable robbery? 88. Or because at that time Cnaeus Dolabella attempted, at your request, to punish the man who had been in command of that vessel, and who had reported to the Milesians what had been done, and had ordered his report, which according to their laws had been inserted in the public registers, to be erased, did you, on that account, fancy that you had escaped from that accusation? 35. That opinion of yours has much deceived you, and on many occasions. For you have always fancied, and especially in Sicily, that you had taken sufficient precautions for your defense, when you had either forbidden anything to be mentioned in the public records, or had compelled that which had been so mentioned to be erased. How vain that step is, although in the former pleading you learnt it in the instance of many cities of Sicily, yet you may learn it again in the case of this city. The citizens are, indeed, obedient to the command, as long as they are present who give the command. As soon as they are gone, they not only set down that which they have been forbidden to set down, but they also write down the reason why it was not entered in the public records at the time. 89. Those documents remain at Miletus, and will remain as long as that city lasts. For the Milesian people had built 10 ships by command of Lucius Marcus out of the taxes imposed by the Roman people, as the other cities of Asia had done, each in proportion to its amount of taxation, wherefore they entered on their public records, that one of the 10 had been lost, not by the sudden attack of pirates, but by the robbery of a lieutenant, not by the violence of a storm, but by this horrible tempest which fell upon the allies. 90 There are at Rome the Legion ambassadors, most noble men and the chief men of the city, who, although they are waiting with apprehension for the month of February 11, and the time of the consuls elect, yet they not only do not dare to deny such an atrocious action when they are asked about it, but they cannot forbear speaking of it unasked if they are present. They will tell you, I say, being induced by regard to religion, and by their fear of their laws at home, what has become of that vessel. They will declare to you that Caius Verus has behaved himself like a most infamous pirate in regard to that fleet which was built against pirates. 36 When Caius Malleolus, the quaestor of Dol Witella, had been slain, he thought that two inheritances had come to him. 1. That of his quaestor in office, for he was immediately desired by Dol Witella to be his proquestor. The other, of the guardianship, for as he was appointed guardian of the young Malleolus, he immediately invaded his property. 91. For Malleolus had started for his province so splendidly equipped that he left actually nothing behind him at home. Besides, he had put out a great deal of money among the provincials, and had taken bills from them. He had taken with him a great quantity of admirably embossed silver plate. For he, too, was a companion of that fellow Verus in that disease and in that covetousness. And so he left behind him at his death a great quantity of silver plate, a great household of slaves, many workmen, many beautiful youths. That fellow seized all the plate that took his fancy, carried off all the slaves he chose, carried off the wines and all the other things which are procured most easily in Asia, which he had left behind, the rest he sold, and took the money himself. 92. Though it was plain that he had received 2,500,000 sesterces, when he returned to Rome, he rendered no account to his ward, none to his ward's mother, none to his fellow guardians. Though he had the servants of his ward, who were workmen, at home, and beautiful and accomplished slaves about him, he said that they were his own, that he had bought them. When the mother and grandmother of the boy repeatedly asked him if he would neither restore the mosey nor render an account, at least to say how much money of Malleolus's he had received, being wearied with their importunities, at last he said, 1,000,000 of sesterces. Then on the last line of his accounts, he put in a name at the bottom by a most shameless error. He put down that he had paid to Chrysogonus, a slave, 600,000 sesterces which he had received for his ward Malleolus. How out of 1,000,000 they became 600,000. How the 600,000 tallied so exactly with other accounts, that of the money belonging to Knaus Carbo there was also a remainder of 600,000 sesterces. And how it was that they were put down as paid to Chrysogonus. Why that name occurred on the bottom line of the page, and after an error, you will judge. 93. Yet, though he had entered in his accounts 600,000 sesterces as having been received, he has never paid over 50,000. Of the slaves, since he has been prosecuted in this manner, some have been restored, some are detained even now. All the gains which they had made, and all their substitutes 12, are detained. 37 This is that fellow's splendid guardianship. See to whom you are entrusting your children. Behold how great is the recollection of a dead companion. Behold how great is the fear of the opinion of the living. When all Asia had given herself up to you to be harassed and plundered, when all Pamphylia was placed at your mercy to be pillaged, were you not content with this rich booty? Could you not keep your hands off your guardianship, off your ward, off the son of your comrade? It is not now the Sicilians. They are now a set of plowmen, as you are constantly saying, who are hemming you in. It is not the men who have been excited against you and rendered hostile to you by your own decrees and edicts. Malleolus is brought forward by me and his mother and his grandmother, who, unfortunate, and weeping, say that their boy has been stripped by you of his father's property. 94 What are you waiting for? Till poor Malleolus rises from the shades below, and demands of you an account of your discharge of the duties of a guardian, of a comrade, of an intimate friend? Fancy that he is present himself, O most avaricious and most licentious man, restore the property of your comrade to his son. If not all you have robbed him of, at least that which you have confessed that you received. Why do you compel the son of your comrade to utter his first words in the form with the voice of indignation and complaint? Why do you compel the wife of your comrade, the mother-in-law of your comrade, in short, the whole family of your dead comrade, to hear evidence against you? Why do you compel most modest and admirable women to come against their wont and against their will into so great an assembly of men? Recite the evidence of them all. The evidence of the mother and grandmother is read. 3895 But how he as proquestor harassed the republic of the Milliads, how he oppressed Lycia, Pamphylia, Pisidia, and all Phrygia, in his levying corn from them, and valuing it according to that valuation of his which he then devised for the first time. It is not necessary for me now to relate, know this much, that these articles and all such matters were transacted through his instrumentality, while he levied on the city's corn, hides, or cloth, sacks, but did not receive the goods but exacted money instead of them. For these articles alone damages were laid in the action against Dol Witella, at 3,000,000 of sesterces. And all these things, even if they were done with the consent of Dol Witella, were yet all accomplished through the instrumentality of that man. 96 I will pause on one article, for many are of the same sort. Recite. Money received from the actions against Knaus Dol Witella, praetor of the Roman people, that which was received from the state of the Millians. I say that you collected this money, that you made this valuation, that money was paid to you. And I prove that you went through every part of the province with the same violence and injustice, when you were collecting most enormous sums, like some disastrous tempest or pestilence. 97 Therefore Marcus Scaurus, who accused Knaus Dol Witella, held him under his power and in subjection. Being a young man, when in prosecuting his inquiries he ascertained the numerous robberies and iniquities of that man, he acted skillfully and warily. He showed him a huge volume full of his exploits. He got from the fellow all he wanted against Dol Witella. He brought him forward as a witness. The fellow said everything which he thought the accuser wished him to say. 98 And of the class of witnesses, men who were accomplices in his robberies, I might have had a great plenty if I had chosen to employ them. Who offered of their own accord to go wherever I chose, in order to deliver themselves from the danger of actions, and from a connection with his crimes. I rejected the voluntary offers of all of them. There was not only no room for a traitor, there was none even for a deserter in my camp. Perhaps they are to be considered better accusers than I, who do all these things. But I wish the defender of others to be praised in my person, not the accuser. he does not dare bring in his accounts to the treasury before Dolabella is condemned. He prevails on the Senate to grant him an adjournment, because he said that his account books had been sealed up by the accusers of Dolabella, just as if he had not the power of copying them. This man is the only man who never renders accounts to the treasury. 39 You have heard the accounts of his quaestorship rendered in 3 lines, but no accounts of his lieutenancy, till he was condemned and banished, who alone could detect any error in them. The accounts of his praetorship, which, according to the decree of the Senate, he ought to have rendered immediately on leaving office, he has not rendered to this very day. 99 He said that he was waiting for the quaestors to appear in the Senate, just as if the praetor could not give in his accounts without the quaestor, in the same way as the quaestor does without the praetor, as you did, Hortensius, and as all have done. He said that Dolabella obtained the same permission. The omen pleased the conscript fathers rather than the excuse. They admitted it. But now the quaestors have arrived sometime. Why have you not rendered them now? Among the accounts of that infamous lieutenancy and pro-quaestorship of yours, those items occur which are necessarily set down also in the accounts of Dolabella. An extract is read of the account of the damages assessed against Dolabella, praetor of the Roman people, for money received. 13. 100 The sum which Dolabella entered to Verres as having been received from him, is less than the sum which Verres has entered as having been paid to him by 435,000 sesterces. The sum which Dolabella made out that Verres received less than he has put down in his account books, is 232,000 sesterces. Dolabella also made out that on account of corn he had received 1,800,000 sesterces. As to which you, O most incorruptible man, had quite a different entry in your account books. Hence it is that those extraordinary gains of yours have accumulated, which we are examining into without any guide, article by article as we can. Hence the account with Quintus and Gnaeus Postumus Curtius, made up of many items, of which that fellow has not one in his account books. Hence the 1,400,000 sesterces paid to Publius Stadius at Athens, as I will prove by witnesses. Hence the praetorship, openly purchased. Unless indeed that also is doubtful, how that man became praetor. 1010, he was a man, indeed, of tried industry and energy, or else of a splendid reputation for economy, or perhaps, which is however of the least importance, for his constant attendance at our assemblies. Man who had lived before his quaestorship with prostitutes and pimps. Who had passed his quaestorship you yourselves know how. Oh, since that infamous quaestorship, has scarcely been 3 days in Rome, who, while absent, has not been out of sight, but has been the common topic of conversation for everyone on account of his countless iniquities. He, on the sudden, the moment he came to Rome, is made praetor for nothing. Besides that, other money was paid to buy off accusations. To whom it was paid is, I think, nothing to me. Nothing to the matter in hand. That it was paid was at the time notorious to everyone while the occurrence was recent. 102 You most foolish, most senseless man, when you were making up your accounts, and when you wanted to shirk out of the charge of having made extraordinary gains, did you think that you would escape sufficiently from all suspicion, if when you lent men money you did not enter any sums as given to them, and put down no such item at all in your account books, while the party were giving you credit in their books for all that had been received? What good did it do you that you had not put down what was paid to them? Did you think you were going to try your cause by the production of no other account books than your own? 4103 However, let us now come to that splendid praetorship and to those crimes which are better known to those who are here present, than even to us who come prepared to speak after long consideration. In dealing with which, I do not doubt that I may not be able to avoid and escape from some blame on the ground of negligence. For many will say, he said nothing of the transaction at which I was present. He never touched upon that injury which was done to me, or to my friend, transactions at which I was present. To all those who are acquainted with the wrongs this man has done had is, to the whole Roman people earnestly wish to make this excuse, that it will not be out of carelessness that I shall pass over many things, but because I wish to reserve some points till I produce the witnesses, and because I think it necessary to omit some altogether with a view to brevity, and to the time my speech must take. I will confess too, though against my will, that, as he never allowed any moment of time to pass free from crime, I have not been able to ascertain fully every iniquity which has been committed by him. Therefore I beg you to listen to me with respect to the crimes of his praetorship, expecting only to hear those mentioned, both in the matters of deciding lawsuits and of insisting on the repair of public buildings, which are thoroughly worthy of a criminal whom it is not worthwhile to accuse of any small or ordinary offenses. 104 For when he was made praetor, leaving the house of Chelidon after having taken the auspices, he drew the lot of the city province, more in accordance with his own inclination and that of Chelidon, than with the wish of the Roman people. And observe how he behaved at the very outset, how his intentions were as shown 14, in his first edict. 41 Publius Annius Isolus died while Caius Sacerdos was praetor. As he had an only daughter, and as he was not included in the census, 15, he did what nature prompted, and what no law forbade, he appointed his daughter heiress of all his property. His daughter was his heiress. Everything made for the orphan. The equity of the law, the wish of the father, the edicts of the praetors, the usage of the law which existed at the time that Isolus died. 105 That fellow, being praetor elect, whether being instigated by others, or being tempted by circumstances, or whether, from the instinctive sagacity which he has in such matters, he came of his own accord to this rascality, without any prompter, without any informer, I know not. You only know the audacity and insanity of the man, appeals to Lucius Annius as the heir, who indeed was appointed heir after the daughter, for I cannot be persuaded that Verres was appealed to by him. He says that he can give him the inheritance by an edict. He instructs the man in what can be done. To the one the property appeared desirable, the other thought that he could sell it. Verres, although he is of singular audacity, still sent privately to the young girl's mother. He preferred taking money for not issuing any new edict, to interposing so shameful and inhuman a decree. 106 Her guardians, if they gave money to the praetor in the name of their ward, especially if it were a huge sum, did not see how they could enter it in their accounts. Did not see how they could give it except at their own risk. And at the same time they did not believe that he would be so wicked. Being often applied to, they refused. I pray you, take notice, how equitable a decree he issued at the will of the man to whom he was giving the inheritance of which the children were robbed. as I understand that the Lex Voconia. Who would ever believe that Varus would be an adversary of women? Or did he do something contrary to the interests of women, in order that the whole edict might not appear to have been drawn up at the will of Cheladin? He wishes, he says, to oppose the covetousness of men. Oh, certainly. Who, not only in the present age, but even in the times of our ancestors, was ever so far removed from covetousness? Recite what comes next, I beg. For the gravity of the man, his knowledge of the law, and his authority delight me. Who, since the censorship of Aulus Postumius and Quintus Fulvius, has made, or shall have made, whoever issued an edict in such a manner. 107 Whoever proposed by an edict any penalty or danger for an act which could not be provided for otherwise either before the edict or after the edict. 42 Publius Annius had made his will in accordance with law, with the statutes, with the authority of all who were consulted. A will neither improper, nor made in disregard of any duty, nor contrary to human nature. But even if he had made such a will as that, still, after his death no new law to have been enacted which should have any effect on his will. I suppose the Voconian law pleased you greatly? You should have imitated Quintus Voconius himself, who did not by his law take away her inheritance from any female whether virgin or matron, but established a law for the future, that no one who after the year of the existing census should be enrolled in the census, should make either virgin or matron his heir. 108 In the Voconian law, there is no has made or shall have made. Nor in any law is time past ever implicated in blame, except in cases which are of their own nature wicked and nefarious, so that, even if there were no law, they would be strenuously to be avoided. And in these cases we see that many things are established by law in such a way that things done previously cannot be called in question. The Cornelian law, the law about testaments, the law about money, and many others, in which no new law is established in the nation, but it is established that what has always been an evil action shall be liable to public prosecution up to a certain time. 109 But if anyone establishes any new regulation on any points of civil law, does he allow everything which has been previously done to remain unaltered? Look at the Altinian law, at the Furian law, at the Voconian law itself, as I said before. In short, at every law on the subject of civil rights. You will find in all of them that regulations are established which are only to come into operation after the passing of the law. Those who attribute the greatest importance to the edict, say that the edict of the praetor is an annual law. You embrace more in an edict than you can in a law. If the 1st of January puts an end to the edict of the praetor, why does not the edict have its birth also on the 1st of January? Or, is it the case that no one can advance forward by his edict into the year when another man is to be praetor, but that he may retire back into the year when another man has been praetor? And if you had published this edict for the sake of right, and not for the sake of one man, you would have composed it more carefully. 43 110 You write, if anyone has made, or shall have made his heir. What are we to think? Suppose a man has bequeathed in legacies more than comes to his heir or heirs, as by the Voconian law a man may do who is not included in the census? Why do you not guard against this, as it comes under the same class? Because in your expressions you are not thinking of the interests of a class, but of an individual. So that it is perfectly evident that you were influenced by a desire for money. And if you had issued this edict with only a prospective operation, it would have been less iniquitous. Still it would have been scandalous, but in that case, though it might have been blamed, it could not have been doubted about, for no one would have broken it. Now it is an edict of such a sort, that anyone can see that it was written, not for the people, but for the second heir of Publius Annius. 111 Therefore, though that heading had been embellished by you with so many words, and with a mercenary preamble, was any praetor found afterwards to draw up an edict in similar style? Not only no one ever did publish such an edict, but no one was ever apprehensive even of anyone publishing such an edict. For after your praetorship many people made wills in the same manner, and among them Annia did so lately. She, by the advice of many of her relations, being a wealthy woman, because she was not included in the census, by her will made her daughter her heiress. This, now, is great proof of men's opinion of the singular wickedness of that fellow, that, though Varus had established this of his own accord, yet no one was apprehensive that anyone could be found to adopt the rule which he had laid down. For you alone were found to be a man who could not be satisfied with correcting the wills of the living, unless you also rescinded those of the dead. 112 You yourself removed this clause from your Sicilian edict. You wished, if any matters arose unexpectedly, to decide them according to your edict as praetor of the city. The defense which you left yourself afterwards you yourself greatly injured, when you yourself, in your provincial edict, repudiated your own authority. 44 And I do not doubt that as this action appears bitter and unworthy to me, to whom my daughter is very dear, it appears so also to each one of you who is influenced by a similar feeling and love for his daughters. For what has nature ordained to be more agreeable and more dear to us? What is more worthy to have all our affections and all our indulgence expended upon it? 113 O most infamous of men, why did you do so great an injury to Publius Annius after death? Why did you cause such indelible grief to his ashes and bones, as to take from his children the property of their father given to them, by the will of their father in accordance with the law and with the statutes, and to give them to whomsoever you pleased? Shall the praetor be able, when we are dead, to take away our property and our fortunes from those to whom we give them while alive? He says, I will neither give any right of petition, nor possession. Will you, then, take away from a young girl her purple-bordered robe? Will you take away, not only the ornaments of her fortune, but those also denoting her noble birth? Do we marvel that the citizens of Lampsacus flew to arms against that man? Do we marvel that when he was leaving his province, he fled secretly from Syracuse as if we were as indignant at what happens to others as at our own injury there would not be a relic of that man left to appear in the forum? 114 The father gives to his daughter, you forbid it. The laws allow it, yet you interpose your authority. He gives to her of his own property in such a manner as not to infringe any law. What do you find to blame in that? Nothing, I think. But I allow you to do so. Forbid it if you can. If you can find anyone to listen to you. If anyone can possibly obey your order. Will you take away their will from the dead, heir property from the living, heir rights from all men? Would not the Roman people have avenged itself by force if it had not reserved you for this occasion and for this trial? Since the establishment of the Praetorian power, we have always adopted this principle, that if no will was produced, then possession was given to that person who would have had the best right to be the heir, if the deceased had died intestate. Why this is the most righteous principle it is easy to show. But in a matter so established by precedent it is sufficient to point out that all men had previously laid down the law in this way, and that this was the ancient and customary edict. 45:115 Listen to another new edict of the fellow in the case of frequent occurrence. And then, while there is any place where civil law can be learned, pray send all the youths of Rome to his lectures. The genius of the man is marvelous. His prudence is marvelous. A man of the name of Minucius died while he was praetor. He left no will. By law his inheritance passed to the Minucian family. If Verus had issued the edict which all praetors both before and after him did issue, possession would have been given to the Minucian family. If any thought himself heir by will, though no will was known, he might proceed by law to put forward his claim to the inheritance. Or if he had taken security for the claim, and given security, he then proceeded to try an action for his inheritance. This is the law which, as I imagine, both our ancestors and we ourselves have always been accustomed to. See, now, how that fellow amended it. 116 He composes an edict. Such language that anyone can perceive that it was written for the sake of one individual. He all but names the man. He details his whole cause. He disregards right, custom, equity, the edicts of all his predecessors. According to the edict of the city praetor, if any doubt arises about an inheritance, if the possessor does not give security, what is it to the praetor which is the possessor? Is not this the point which ought to be inquired into, who ought to be the possessor? Therefore, because he is in possession, you do not remove him from the possession. If he were not in possession, you would not give him possession. For you nowhere say so. Nor do you embrace anything else in your edict except that cause for which you had received money. What follows is ridiculous. 117 If any doubt arises about an inheritance, and if testamentary papers are produced before me, sealed with not fewer seals than are required by law, I shall adjudge the inheritance as far as possible according to the testamentary papers. So far as usual. This ought to follow next, if testamentary papers are not produced. What says he? That he will adjudge it to him who says he is the heir. What, then, is the difference whether testamentary papers are produced or not? If he produces them, though they may have only one seal less than is required by law, you will not give him possession. But if he produces no such papers at all, you will. What shall I say now? That no one else ever issued a similar edict afterwards? A very marvelous thing, truly, that there should have been no one who chose to be considered like that fellow. He himself, in his Sicilian edict, has not this passage. No. For he had received his payment for it. And so in the edict which I have mentioned before, which he issued in Sicily, about giving possession of inheritances, he laid down the same rules which all the praetors at Rome had laid down besides himself. From the Sicilian edict, if any doubt arise about an inheritance. 46:118 But, in the name of the immortal gods, what can possibly be said of this business? For I ask of you now a second time, as I did just now, with reference to the affair of Annia, about the inheritance of females, ask you now, I say, about the possession of inheritances, how you were unwilling to transfer those paragraphs into your provincial edict? Did you think those men who were living in the province more worthy to enjoy just laws than we were?
Sure.
Or is one thing just in Rome and another in Sicily? For you cannot say in this place that there are many things in the province which require to be regulated differently from what they would if they existed at Rome. At all events not in the case of taking possession of inheritances, or of the inheritances of women. For in both these cases I see that nor only all other magistrates, but that you yourself, have issued edicts word for word the same as those which are accustomed to be issued at Rome. The clauses which, with great disgrace and for a great bribe, you had inserted in your edict at Rome, those alone, I see, you omitted in your Sicilian edict, in order not to incur odium in the province for nothing. 119 And as, while he was praetor-elect, he composed his whole edict at the pleasure of those who bought law of him to secure their own advantage. So also, when he had entered on his office, he used to make decrees contrary to his edict without the slightest scruple. Therefore, Lucius Piso filled many books with the affairs in which he had interposed his authority, because Verus had decreed in a manner contrary to his edict. And I think that you have not forgotten what a multitude and what respectable citizens used to assemble before Piso's seat while that man was praetor, and unless he had had him for a colleague, he would have been stoned in the very forum. But his injuries at that time appeared of less importance, because there was a refuge always ready in the justice and prudence of Piso, whom men could apply to without any labor, or any trouble, or any expense, and even without a patron to recommend them. 124 I entreat you, recall to your recollection, O judges, what license that fellow took in determining the law. How great a variation there was in his decrees, what open buying and selling of justice. How empty the houses of all those men who were accustomed to be consulted on points of civil law, how full and crammed was the house of Chelidon. And when men had come from that woman to him, and had whispered in his ear, at one time he would recall those between whom he had just decided, and alter his decree. At another time he, without the least scruple, gave a decision between other parties quite contrary to the last decision which he had given only a little while before. 121 Hence it was that men were found who were even ridiculous in their indignation. Some of whom, as you have heard, said that it was not strange that such piggish 16, justice should be worthless. Others were colder. But still, because they were angry they seemed ridiculous, while they execrated such erdos who had spared so worthless a poor. And I should hardly mention these things, for they were not extraordinarily witty, nor are they worthy of the gravity of the present subject, if I did not wish you to recollect that his worthlessness and iniquity were constantly in the mouths of the populace, and had become a common proverb. 47:122 But shall I first speak of his arrogance towards the Roman people, or his cruelty? Beyond all question, cruelty is the graver and more atrocious crime. Do you think then that these men have forgotten how that fellow was accustomed to beat the common people of Rome with rods? And indeed the tribune of the people touched on that matter in the public assembly, when he produced in the sight of the Roman people the man whom he had beaten with rods. and I will give you the opportunity of taking cognizance of that business at its proper time. 123 But who is ignorant with what arrogance he behaved? How he disregarded everyone of a low condition, how he despised them, how he did not account the poor to be free men at all. Publius Trebonius made many virtuous and honorable men his heirs, and among them his own freedmen. He had a brother, Aulus Trebonius, a proscribed man. As he wished to make provision for him, he put down in his will that his heirs should take an oath to manage that not less than half of each man's share should come to Aulus Trebonius, that proscribed brother of his. The freedman takes the oath. The other heirs go to Verus, and point out to him that they ought not to take such an oath. That they should be doing what was contrary to the Cornelian law, which forbids a proscribed man to be assisted. They obtain from him authority to refuse the oath. He gives them possession. That I do not find fault with. Certainly it was a scandalous thing for any part of his brother's property to be given to a man who was proscribed and in want. But that freedman thought that he should be committing a wickedness if he did not take the oath in obedience to the will of his patron. 124 Therefore Verus declares that he will not give him possession of his inheritance, in order that he may not be able to assist his proscribed patron. And also in order that that might serve as a punishment for having obeyed the will of his other patron, you give possession to him who did not take the oath. I admit your right to do so. It is a privilege of the praetor. You take it from him who has taken the oath. According to what precedent? He is aiding a proscribed man. There is a law. There is a punishment established in such a case. What is that to him who is determining the law? Do you blame him because he assisted his patron, who was in distress at the time, or because he attended to the wishes of his other patron, who was dead, from whom he had received the greatest of all benefits? Which of these actions are you blaming? And then that most admirable man, sitting on his curule chair, said this, Can a freedman be heir to a Roman knight of such great wealth? Oh, how modest must the class of freedmen be, since he departed from that place alive. 125 I can produce 600 decrees in which, even if I were not to allege that money had interrupted justice, still the unprecedented and iniquitous nature of the decrees themselves would prove it. But that by one example you may be able to form your conjectures as to the rest, listen to what you have already heard in the previous pleading. 48 There was a man called Caius Sulpicius Olympus. He died while Caius Sacerdos was praetor. I don't know whether it was not before Verus had begun to announce himself as a candidate for the praetorship. He made Marcus Octavius Liger his heir. Liger thus entered upon his inheritance. He took possession while Sacerdos was praetor, without any dispute. After Verus entered on his office, in accordance with his edict, an edict such as Sacerdos had not issued, the daughter of the patron of Sulpicius began to claim from Liger a sixth part of the inheritance. Liger was absent. His brother Lucius conducted his cause. His friends and relations were present. That fellow Verus said that, unless the business was settled with a woman, he should order her to take possession. Lucius Gellius defended the cause of Liger. He showed that his edict ought not to prevail with respect to those inheritances which had accrued to the heirs before his praetorship. That, if this edict had existed at that time, perhaps Liger would not have entered upon the inheritance at all. This just demand, and the highest authority of influential men, was beaten down by money. 126 Liger came to Rome. He did not doubt that, if he himself had seen Verus, he should have been able to move the man by the justice of his cause and by his own influence. He went to him to his house. He explains the whole business. He points out to him how long ago it was that the inheritance had come to him and, as it was easy for an able man to do in a most just cause, he said many things which might have influenced anyone. At last he began to entreat him not to despise his influence and scorn his authority to such an extent as to inflict such an injury upon him. The fellow began to accuse Liger of being so assiduous and so attentive in a business which was adventitious, and only belonging to him by way of inheritance. He said that he ought to have a regard for him also. That he required a great deal himself. That the dogs whom he kept about him required a great deal. I cannot recount those things to you more plainly than you have heard Liger himself relate them in his evidence. 127 What are we to say, then, O Verus? Are we not to give credence to even these men as witnesses? Are these things not material to the question before us? Are we not to believe Marcus Octavius? Are we not to believe Lucius Liger? Who will believe us? Who shall we believe? What is there, O Verus, which can ever be made plain by witnesses, if this is not made so? Or is that which they relate a small thing? It is nothing less than the praetor of the city establishing this law as long as he remains in office, that the praetor ought to be co-heir with all those to whom an inheritance comes. And can we doubt with what language that fellow was accustomed to address the rest of the citizens of an inferior rank, of inferior authority, and of inferior fortune? With what language he was accustomed to address country people from the municipal towns? With what language he was accustomed to address those whom he never thought free men, the freedmen? When he did not hesitate to ask Marcus Octavius Liger, a man of the highest consideration as to position, rank, name, virtue, ability, and influence, for money for deciding in favor of his undoubted lights. 49 And as to how he behaved in the matter of putting the public buildings in proper repair, what shall I say? They have said, who felt it? There are others, too, who are speaking of this. 128 Notorious and manifest facts have been brought forward, and shall be brought forward again. Caius Fannius, a Roman knight, the brother of Quintus Titinius, one of your judges, has said that he gave you money. Recite the evidence of Caius Fannius. Read. Pray do not believe Caius Fannius when he says this. Do not believe I mean, O Quintus Titinius, not believe Caius Fannius, your own brother. For he is saying what is incredible. He is accusing Caius Verus of avarice and audacity. Vices which appear to meet in anyone else rather than in him. Quintus Tatius has said something of the same sort, a most intimate friend of the father of Verus, and not unconnected with his mother, either in family or in name. He has produced his account books, by which he proves that he had given him money. Recite the particulars of the accounts of Quintus Tatius. Read. Recite the evidence of Quintus Tatius. Read. Shall we not believe either the account books of Quintus Stadius, or his evidence? What then shall we follow in coming to our decision? What else is giving all men free license for every possible sin and crime, if it is not the disbelieving the evidence of the most honorable men, and the account books of honest ones? 129 For why should I mention the daily conversation and daily complaints of the Roman people? I that fellow's most impudent that, I should rather say, his new and unexampled barber? How he dared in the temple of Castor, in that most illustrious and renowned monument, a temple which is placed before the eyes and in the daily view of the Roman people, to which the Senate is often summoned, where crowded deliberations on the most momentous affairs take place every day, why should I mention his having dared to leave in that place, in contempt of anything anyone can say, an eternal monument of his audacity? 5130 Publius Junius, O judges, had the guardianship of the temple of Castor. He died in the consulship of Lucius Sulla and Quintus Metellus. He left behind him a young son under age. When Lucius Octavius and Caius Aurelius the consuls had let out contracts for the holy temple, and were not able to examine all the public buildings to see in what repair they were, nor could the praetors to whom that business had been assigned, namely, Caius Sacerdos and Marcus Caesius. A decree of the Senate was passed that Caius Verus and Publius Caelius, the praetors, should examine into and decide about those public buildings as to which no examination or decision had yet taken place. And after this power was conferred on him, that man, as you have learned from Caius Fannius and from Quintus Stadius, as he had committed his robberies in every sort of affair without the least disguise and with the greatest effrontery, wished to leave this as a most visible record of his robberies, which we might, not occasionally hear of, but see every day of our lives. 131 He inquired who was bound to deliver up the temple of Castor in good repair. He knew that Junius himself was dead. He desired to know to whom his property belonged. He hears that his son is underage. The fellow, who had been in the habit of saying openly that boys and girls who were minors were the surest prey for the praetors, said that the thing he had so long wished for had been brought into his bosom. He thought that, in the care of a monument of such vast size, of such laborious finish, however sound and in however thorough a state of repair it might be, he should certainly find something to do, and some excuse for plunder. 132 The temple of Castor ought to have been entrusted to Lucius Robonius. He by chance was the guardian of the young Junius by his father's will. An agreement had been made between him and his ward, without any injury to either, in what state it should be given up to him. Verus summons Robonius to appear before him. He asks him whether there is anything which has not been handed over to him by his ward, which might be exacted from him. When he said, as was the case, that the delivery of the temple had been very easy for his ward, that all the statues and presents were in their places, that the temple itself was sound in every part, that fellow began to think it a shameful thing if he was to give up so large a temple and so extensive a work without enriching himself by booty, and especially by booty to be got from a minor. 51-133 He comes himself into the temple of Castor. He looks all over the temple. He sees the roof adorned all over with a most splendid ceiling, and all the rest of the building as good as new and quite sound. He ponders. He considers what he can do. Some one of those dogs, of whom he himself had said to Liquor that there were a great number about him, said to him, You, O Verus, have nothing which you can do here, unless you like to try the pillars by a plumb line. The man, utterly ignorant of everything, asks what is the meaning of the expression, by a plumb line. They tell him that there is hardly any pillar which is exactly perpendicular when tried by a plumb line. By my truth, says he, that is what we must do. Let the pillars be tested by a plumb line. 134 Robonius, like a man who knew the law, in which law the number of the pillars only is set down, but no mention made of a plumb line, and who did not think it desirable for himself to receive the temple on such terms, lest he should be hereafter expected to hand it over under similar conditions, says that he is not to be treated in that way, and that such an examination has no right to be made. Verus orders Robonius to be quiet, and at the same time holds out to him some hopes of a partnership with himself in the business. He easily overpowers him, a moderate man, and not at all obstinate in his opinions. And so he adheres to his determination of having the pillars examined. 135 This unprecedented resolve, and the unexpected calamity of the minor, is immediately reported to Caius Mustius, the stepfather of the youth, who was lately dead, to Marcus Junius, his uncle, and to Publius Titius, his guardian, a most frugal man. They report the business to a man of the greatest consideration, of the greatest benevolence and virtue, Marcus Marcellus, who is also a guardian of the minor. Marcus Marcellus comes to Verus. He begs of him with many arguments, in the name of his own good faith and diligence in his office, not to endeavor to deprive Junius his ward of his father's fortune by the greatest injustice. Verus, who had already in hope and belief devoured that booty, was neither influenced by the justice of Marcus Marcellus's argument, nor by his authority. And therefore he answered that he should proceed with the examination, according to the orders which he had given. 136 As they found that all applications to this man were ineffectual, all access to him difficult, and almost impossible, being, as he was, a man with whom neither right, nor equity, nor mercy, nor the arguments of a relation, nor the wishes of a friend, nor the influence of anyone had any weight, they resolved that the best thing which they could do, as indeed might have occurred to anyone, was to beg Chaldin for her aid, who, while Verus was praetor, was not only the real judge in all civil law, and in the disputes of all private individuals, but who was supreme also in this affair of the repairs of the public buildings. 52-137 Caius Mustius, a Roman knight, a farmer of the revenues, a man of the very highest honor, came to Childin. Marcus Junius, the uncle of the youth, a most frugal and temperate man, came to her. A man who shows his regard for his high rank by the greatest honor, and modesty, and attention to his duties. Publius Titius, his guardian, came to her. Oh, that praetorship of yours, bitter to many, miserable, scandalous? To say nothing of other points, with what shame, with what indignation, do you think that such men as these went to the house of a prostitute? Men who would have encountered such disgrace on no account, unless the urgency of their duty and of their relationship to the injured youth had compelled them to do so. They came, as I say, to Childin. The house was full. New laws, new decrees, new decisions were being solicited. Let him give me possession. Do not let him take away from me. Do not let him give sentence against me. Let him adjudge the property to me. Some were paying money, some were signing documents. The house was full, not with the prostitute's train, but rather with the crowd-seeking audience of the praetor. 138 As soon as they can get access to her, the men whom I have mentioned go to her. Mustius speaks. He explains the whole affair. He begs for her assistance. He promises money. She answers, considering she was a prostitute, not unreasonably. She says that she will gladly do what they wish, and that she will talk the matter over with Verus carefully, and desires Mustius to come again. Then they depart. The next day they go again. She says that the man cannot be prevailed on, that he says that a vast sum can be made of the business. 53 I am afraid that perhaps some of the people, who were not present at the former pleading, because these things seem incredible on account of their consummate baseness, may think that they are invented by me. You, O judges, have known them before. 139 Publius Titius, the guardian of the minor Junius, stated them on his oath. So did Marcus Junius, his uncle and guardian. So would Mustius have stated them if he had been alive. But as Mustius cannot, Lucius Domitius stated that while the affair was recent, he heard these things stated by Mustius. And though he knew that I had had the account from Mustius while he was alive, for I was very intimate with him. And indeed I defended Caius Mustius when he gained that trial which he had about almost the whole of his property. Though, I say, Lucius Domitius knew that I was aware that Mustius was accustomed to tell him all his affairs, yet he said nothing about Chelidon as long as he could help it. He directed his replies to other points. So great was the modesty of that most eminent young man, of that pattern for the youth of the city, that for some time, though he was pressed by me on that point, he would rather give any answer than mention the name of Chelidon. At first, he said that the friends of Verus had been deputed to mention the subject to him. At last, after a time, being absolutely compelled to do so, he named Chelidon. 140 Are you not ashamed, O Verus, to have carried on your praetorship according to the will of that woman, whom Lucius Domitius scarcely thought it creditable to him even to mention the name of? 54 Being rejected by Chelidon, they adopt the necessary resolution of undertaking the business themselves. They settle the business, which ought to have come to scarcely 40,000 sesterces, with Robonius the other guardian, for 200,000. Robonius reports the fact to Verus. As it seems to him the exaction has been sufficiently enormous and sufficiently shameless. He, who had expected a good deal more, receives Robonius with harsh language, and says that he cannot satisfy him with such a settlement as that. To cut the matter short, he says that he shall issue contracts for the job. 141 The guardians are ignorant of this. They think that what has been settled with Robonius is definitely arranged. They fear no further misfortune for their ward. But Verus does not procrastinate. He begins to let out his contracts, without issuing any advertisement or notice of the day, at a most unfavorable time, the very time of the Roman games, and while the forum is decorated for them. Therefore Robonius gives notice to the guardians that he renounces the settlement to which he had come. However, the guardians come at the appointed time. Junius, the uncle of the youth, bids. Verus began to change color, his countenance, his speech, his resolution failed him. He begins to consider what he was to do. If the contract was taken by the minor, if the affair slipped through the fingers of the purchaser whom he himself had provided, he would get no plunder. Therefore he contrives hat. Nothing very cleverly, nothing of which anyone could say, it was a rascally trick, but still a deep one. Do not expect any disguised roguery from him, any underhand trick. You will find everything open, undisguised, shameless, senseless, audacious. 142 If the contract be taken by the minor, all the plunder is snatched out of my hands. What then is the remedy? What? The minor must not be allowed to have the contract. Where is the usage in the case of selling property, securities, or lands adopted by every consul, and censor, and praetor, and quaestor, that the bidder shall have the preference to whom the property belongs, and at whose risk the property is sold? He excludes that bidder alone to whom alone, I was nearly saying, the power of taking the contract ought to have been offered. For why, oh the youth might say, should anyone aspire to my money against my will? What does he come forward for? The contract is let out for a work which is to be done and paid for out of my money. I say that it is I who am going to put the place in repair. The inspection of it afterwards will belong to you who let out the contract. You have taken sufficient security for the interests of the people with bonds and sureties. And if you do not think sufficient security has been taken, will you as praetor send whomsoever you please to take possession of my property, and not permit me to come forward in defense of my own portion? 55-143 It is worthwhile to consider the words of the contract itself. You will say that the same man drew it up who drew up that edict about inheritance. The contract for work to be done, which the minor Junius is. Speak, I pray you, a little more plainly. Caius Verus, the praetor of the city, has added. The contracts of the censors are being amended. For what do they say? I see in many old documents, now Domitius, Lucius Metellus, Lucius Cassius, now Servilius have added. Caius Verus wants something of the same sort. Read. What has he added? Admit not as a partner in this work anyone who has taken a contract from Lucius Marcius and Marcus Perperna the censors. Give him no snare in it. And let him not contract for it. Why so? Is it that the work may not be faulty? But the inspection afterwards belong to you. Lest he should not have capital enough. But sufficient security had been taken for the people's interest in bonds and sureties, and more security still might have been had. 144 If in this case the business itself, if the scandalous nature of your injustice had no weight with you. F the misfortune of this minor, the tears of his relations, the peril of Decimus Brutus, whose lands were pledged as security for him, and the authority of Marcus Marcellus his guardian had no influence with you. Did you not even consider this, that your crime would be such that you would neither be able to deny it, for you had entered it in your account books, nor, if you confessed it, to make any excuse for it? The contract is knocked down at 550,000 sesterces, while the guardians kept crying out that they could do it even to the satisfaction of the most unjust of men, for 80,000. In truth, what was the job? 145 That which you saw. All those pillars which you see whitewashed, had a crane put against them, were taken down at a very little expense, and put up again of the same stone as before. And you let this work out for 560,000 sesterces. And among those pillars I say that there are some which have never been moved at all by your contractor. I say that there are some which only had the outer coat scraped off, and a fresh coat put on. But, if I had thought that it cost so much to whitewash pillars, I should certainly never have stood for the aedileship. Still, in order that something might appear to be really being done, and that it might not seem to be a mere robbery of a minor if in the course of the work you injure anything, you must repair it. 56-146 What was there that he could injure, when he was only putting back every stone in its place? He who takes the contract must give security to bear the man harmless who has taken the work from the former contractor. He is joking when he orders Robonius to give himself security. Ready money is to be paid. Out of what funds? From his funds who cried out that he would do for 80,000 sesterces what you let out at 560,000. Out of what funds? Out of the funds of a minor, whose tender age and desolate condition, even if he had no guardians, the praetor himself ought to protect. But as his guardians did protect him, you took away not only his paternal fortune, but the property of the guardians also. 147 Execute the work in the best materials of every sort. Was any stone to be cut and brought to the place? Nothing was to be brought but the crane. For no stone, no materials at all were brought. There was just as much to be done in that contract as took a little labor of artisans at low wages, and there was the hire of the crane. Do you think it was less work to make one entirely new pillar without any old stone, which could be worked up again, or to put back those four in their places? No one doubts that it is a much better job to make one new one. I will prove that in private houses, where there has been a great deal of expensive carriage, pillars no smaller than these are contracted for to be placed in an open court for 40,000 sesterces apiece. 148 But it is folly to argue about such manifest shamelessness of that man at any greater length, especially when in the whole contract he has openly disregarded the language and opinion of every one, inasmuch as he has added at the bottom of it, let him have the old materials for himself. As if any old materials were taken from that work, and as if the whole work were not done with old materials. But still, if the minor was not allowed to take the contract, it was not necessary for it to come to Verus himself. Some other of the citizens might have undertaken the work. Everyone else was excluded no less openly than the minor. He appointed a day by which the work must be completed, the 1st of December. He gives out the contract about the 13th of September. Everyone is excluded by the shortness of the time. What happens then? How does Robonius contrive to have his work done by that day? 57-149 No one troubles Robonius, neither on the 1st of December, nor on the 5th, nor on the 13th. At last Verus himself goes away to his province some time before the work is completed. After he was prosecuted, at first he said that he could not enter the work in his accounts. When Robonius pressed it, he attributed the cause of it to me, because I had sealed up his books. Robonius applies to me, and sends his friends to apply to me. He easily gets what he wishes for. Verus did not know what he was to do. By not having entered it in his accounts, he thought he should be able to make some defense. But he felt sure that Robonius would reveal the whole of the transaction. Although, what could be more plain than it now is, even without the evidence of any witness whatever. At last he enters the work and Robonius's name is undertaken by him, 4 years after the day which he had fixed for its completion. 150 He would never have allowed such terms as those if any other citizen had been the contractor. When he had shut out all the other contractors by the early day which he had fixed, and also because men did not choose to put themselves in the power of a man who, if they took the contract, thought that his plunder was torn from his hands. For why need we discuss the point where the money went to? He himself has showed us. First of all, when Decimus Brutus contended eagerly against him, who paid 560,000 sesterces of his own money. And as he could not resist him, though he had given out the job, and taken securities for its execution, he returned him 110,000. Now if this had been another man's money, he clearly could not have done so. In the second place, the money was paid to Cornificius, whom he cannot deny to have been his secretary. Lastly, the accounts of Robonius himself cry out loudly that the plunder was Verus's own. Read the items of the accounts of Robonius. 58-151 Even in this place in the former pleadings Quintus Hortensius complained that the young Junius came clad in his predix 17, into your presence, and stood with his uncle while he was giving his evidence. And said that I was seeking to rouse the popular feeling, and to excite odium against him, by producing the boy. What then was there, O Hortensius, to rouse the popular feeling? What was there to excite odium in that boy? I suppose, forsooth, I had brought forward the son of Gracchus, or of Saturninus, or of some man of that sort, to excite the feelings of an ignorant multitude by the mere name and recollection of his father. He was the son of Publius Junius, one of the common people of Rome, whom his dying father thought he ought to recommend to the protection of guardians and relations, and of the laws, and of the equity of the magistrates, and of your administration of justice. 152 He, through the wicked letting out of contracts by that man, and through his nefarious robbery, being deprived of all his paternal property and fortune, came before your tribunal, if for nothing else, at least to see him through whose conduct he himself has passed many years in mourning, a little less gaily 18, dressed than he was used to be. Therefore, O Hortensius, it was not his age but his cause, not his dress but his fortune, that seemed to you calculated to rouse the popular feeling. Nor did it move you so much that he had come with the predixta, as that he had come without the bulla. 19. For no one was influenced by that dress which custom and the right of his free birth allowed him to wear. Men were indignant, and very indignant, that the ornament of childhood which his father had given him, the proof and sign of his good fortune, had been taken from him by that robber. 153 Nor were the tears which were shed for him shed more by the people than by us, and by yourself, O Hortensius, and by those who are to pronounce sentence in this cause. For because it is the common cause of all men, the common danger of all men, such wickedness like a conflagration must be put out by the common endeavors of all men. For we have little children. It is uncertain how long the life of each individual among us may last. We, while alive, ought to take care and provide that their desolate condition and childhood may be secured by the strongest possible protection. For who is there who can defend the childhood of our children against the dishonesty of magistrates? Their mother, I suppose. No doubt, the mother Vania, though a most noble woman, was a great protection to her when she was left a minor. No doubt she, by imploring the aid of gods and men, prevented him from robbing her infant ward of her father's fortunes. Can their guardians defend them? Very easily, no doubt, with the praetor of that sort by whom both the arguments, and the earnestness, and the authority of Marcus Marcellus in the cause of his ward Junius were disregarded. 59-154 Do we ask what he did in the distant province of Phrygia? What in the most remote parts of Pamphylia? What a rower of pirates he proved himself in war, who had been found to be a nefarious plunderer of the Roman people in the Forum. Do we doubt what that man would do with respect to spoils taken from the enemy, who appropriated to himself so much plunder from the spoils of Lucius Metellus? 20. Who let out a contract for whitewashing 4 pillars at a greater price than Metellus paid for erecting the whole of them? Must we wait to hear what the witnesses from Sicily say? Who has ever seen that temple who is not a witness of your avarice, of your injustice, of your audacity? Who has ever come from the statue of Vertumnus into the Circus Maximus, without being reminded at every step of your avarice? For that road, the road of the sacred cars and of such solemn processions, you have had repaired in such a way that you yourself do not dare go by it. Can anyone think that when you were separated from Italy by the sea you spared the allies? You who chose the temple of Castor to be the witness of your thefts which the Roman people saw every day, and even the judges at the very moment that they were giving their decision concerning you. 61-55 And he, even during his praetorship, exercised the office of judge in public cases. 21. For even that must not be passed over. A fine was sought to be recovered from Quintus Opinius before him while praetor, who was brought to trial, as it was alleged, indeed, because while tribune of the people he had interposed his veto in a manner contrary to the Cornelian law. 22. But, in reality, because while tribune of the people he had said something which gave offense to some one of the nobles. And if I were to wish to say anything of that decision, I should have to call in question and to attack many people, which it is not necessary for me to do. I will only say that a few arrogant men, to say the least of them, with his assistance, ruined all the fortunes of Quintus Opinius in fun and joke. 156 Again. Does he complain of me, because the first pleading of his cause was brought to an end by me in 9 days only? When before himself as judge, Quintus Opinius, a senator of the Roman people, in 3 hours lost his property, his position, and all his titles of honor? On account of the scandalous nature of which decision, the question has often been mooted in the Senate of taking away the whole class of fines and sentences of that sort. But what plunder he amassed in selling the property of Quintus Opinius, and how openly, how scandalously he amassed it would take too long to relate now. This I say, and I make it plain to you by the account books of most honorable men, believe that I have invented it all for the present occasion. 157 Now the man who profiting by the disaster of a Roman senator, at whose trial he had presided while praetor, indeed would to strip him of his spoils and carry them to his own house, has he a right to deprecate any calamity to himself. 61 For as for the choosing of other judges by Junius, 23, of that I say nothing. For why should I? Should I venture to speak against the lists which you produced? It is difficult to do so. For not only does your own influence and that of the judges deter me, but also the golden ring of your secretary. 24 I will not say that which it is difficult to prove. I will say this which I will prove. Had any men of the first consequence heard you say that you ought to be pardoned for having produced a false list, for that, unless you had guarded against it, you yourself would also have been ruined by the same storm of unpopularity as that under which Caius Junius fell. 158 In this way has that fellow learned to take care of himself and of his own safety, by entering both in his own private registers and in the public documents what had never happened, by facing all mention of what had, and by continually taking away something, changing something, taking care that no error was visible, interpolating something. For he has come to such a pitch, that he cannot even find a defense for his crimes without committing other crimes. That most senseless man thought that such a substitution of his own judges also could be effected by the instrumentality of his comrade, Quintus Curtius, who was to be principal judge. And unless I had prevented that by the power of the people, and the outcries and reproaches of all men, the advantage of having judges taken from this Decuria 25, of our body, whose influence it was desirable for me should be rendered as extensive and possible, while he was substituting others for them without any reason, and placing on the bench those whom Verres had approved. The rest of this oration is lost. Footnotes This refers to the following act of Verres. Single pirate ship had been taken by his lieutenant. The captain bribed Verres to save his life, but the people were impatient for the execution of him and his chief officers. Verres, who had in his dungeons many Roman citizens who had offended him, muffled up their faces, so that they could not speak and could not be recognized, and produced them on the scaffold, and put them to death as the pirates for whose execution the people were clamoring. By vote or the money was voted to the tribune Aerarii, and was paid by them to the questor, to be paid by him to the army. Ariminum had been betrayed by Albinovinus, Marius's lieutenant, to Sulla. It was allowed to the aediles, and it was not uncommon for them to borrow the cities of the allies celebrated and beautiful statues to adorn the shows and the games which they exhibited. And afterwards they were restored to their owners. The custom was for the accuser to put a seal on the house and effects of the man whom he was preparing to prosecute, in order that no evidence of the theft to be imputed might be removed by the removal of the stolen goods. The quaestors Aerarii were sent to take possession in the name of the people of the effects of a man who was convicted. The sectors or brokers attended them to appraise the goods seized. In some editions the passage from Quae Certinum to non ad se pertinere is transferred to the previous chapter, and inserted after de Operator, but there is not the least reason for this transposition, which is contrary to the authority of every manuscript. This had happened about 12 years before, in the consulship of the younger Marius and Carbo, AUC. 672. Dolabella was governor of Cilicia at the time Verres was acting as his lieutenant and proquestor. On his return from his government he was prosecuted by scores for corruption, and was condemned mainly through the evidence of Verres. Cicero here, one may almost say, plays on the meanings of the word legatus, which means not only a lieutenant, but also an ambassador. The persons of ambassadors have always, by the laws of nations, been considered to be sacred, but Verres was not an ambassador, but a lieutenant. It was in the month of February that the Senate was used to give audience to the deputies from the provinces, and the consuls-elect, as has been said before, were notoriously in the interest of Verres. As slaves often acted as factors or agents for their masters in matters of business, and, as such, were often entrusted with property to a large amount, there arose a practice of allowing the slave to consider part of the gains as his own. This was his peculium. According to strict law, the peculium was the property of the master, but according to usage it was the property of the slave. Sometimes a slave would have another slave under him, who had a peculium with respect to the first slave, just as the first slave had a peculium with respect to his master. On this practice was founded the distinction between servii ordinary and vicari. Myth, Dict. And pages 869, 870. V. Service. Ottoman makes sure that there is some corruption of the MS here, and Gravius agrees with him. The whole passage is very obscure and the more difficult because we are not acquainted with the forms of proceeding which were followed against magistrates convicted of extortion. It is not clear, as far as appears from Cicero's speech, that, though there was a discrepancy between the accounts of Verres and that of Dolabella, the fault was necessarily in the accounts of Verres. Especially as Dolabella had been justly convicted of extortion and malversation already. Undoubtedly Cicero produced witnesses who assisted to put the case in the point of view in which he wished it to be looked at. As Minorius. After the praetors were appointed, before they entered on the discharge of their duties as judges, they were in the habit of issuing an edict, setting forth the principles which they intended should govern their decisions. And they used to do this in the public assembly after they had taken the oath to observe the law. And Hotaman. By the Lex Boconia it was enacted, that no person who should be included in the census, after the census of that year, BC 169, should make any female his heir. Cicero does not state that the Lex fixed the census at any sum. But it appears from other writers that a woman could not be made heirs by any person who was rated in the census at 100,000 sesterces. The Lex only applied to girls, and therefore a daughter or other female could inherit ad instato to any amount. The vessel virgins could make women their heirs in all cases, which was the only exception to the provisions of the law. If the terms of the law are correctly reported by Cicero, a person who was not census might make a woman his heirs whatever was the amount of his property. Still there is a difficulty about the meaning of census. If it is taken to mean that a person whose property was above 100,000 sesterces, and who was not included in the census, could dispose of his property as he pleased by will, the purpose of the law would be frustrated, and further, the not being included in the census makes census it seems rather vague. Another provision of the law, mentioned by Cicero, forbade a person who was census to give more in amount in the form of a legacy or a donatio mortis causu to any person than the heirs or heralds should take. Myth, Dict. And. Pages 1059, v. Boconia Lex, with a special reference to this passage. There is a pun here on the name of Verres, which means a pig, boar, and on the name of Sacerdos, which means also a sacrificing priest. The praetexto was a token of the tender age of the youth, as it was only worn by boys under the age of 17, and then was exchanged by the toga virilis. Dressed, that is, in the mourning robe in which defendants in criminal prosecutions usually appeared in court. The boa was an ornament of gold worn by children, suspended from their necks, especially by the children of the noble and wealthy. It was worn by children of both sexes, as a token of paternal affection and of high birth. Instead of the bulla of gold, boys of inferior rank, including the children of freedmen, wore only a piece of leather. Myth, Dict. And. V. Bulla. This temple of Castor had been vowed by Postumius, the dictator at the Battle of Lake Regillus. It was decorated with statues and other embellishments by Lucius Metellus Germine Dalmaticus, out of the wealth he acquired by, and the spoils he brought back from, the war in Illyricum. The praetors appointed the judges, but had not themselves the right of sitting as judges in all criminal cases, only in a few special ones. This law had been passed by Sulla to take away from the tribunes the power of imposing their veto, but Pompus restored it to them. In the trial between Cluentius and Oppianicus, Junius was the presiding judge. The imputation on him was that he had used fraudulent tricks to pack the tribunal, in selecting by lot the judges who were to act instead of those who had been objected to by both parties. The allusion is to the golden ring which Verres, when leaving Sicily, had publicly decreed to his secretary, as is mentioned also in the fourth oration against Verres, that de re frumentaria. With the passing of special enactments for the punishment of particular offences was introduced the practice of forming a body of judices for the trial of such offences as the enactments were directed against. Thus it is said that the Lex Calpurnia de Peccanis Repetundis established the album judicum, or the body out of which the judices were to be chosen. It is not known what was the number of the judges so constituted, but it has been conjectured that the number was 350, and that 10 were chosen from each tribe, and thus the origin of the phrase, Dicere judicum is explained. Myth, Dict, and. Pages 531, v. Judux.
That's my, thing that I need. My objective. Oh no, I already won that. Can't get any more till tomorrow. You alright?
Concerning his manner of deciding cases as a judge while in Sicily. Cicero divides his accusation of errors, on account of his conduct in Sicily, under 4 heads, of which the first is judicial corruption and extortion. And in this branch of the accusation he does not attend to the chronological order of his offenses, but takes the instances according to the different classes under which they seem to fall, and according to their importance. 1. Many things, O judges, must be necessarily passed over by me, in order that I may be able at last